Number 10, Animal Heaven. This was pretty odd, and we're still talking about it. Rightfully so. Coco the gorilla. She was a famous primate known for her ability to communicate through sign language. We've all seen that video with her and Robin Williams tickling each other laughing. It's heartbreaking. It's beautiful. Gorillas are very smart and very strong. So strong. Francine Patterson, who was Coco's trainer and of course the closest human around to Coco, was asked in an interview how deep their conversations with Coco would actually go. The caregiver showed Coco a skeleton once and asked if it is alive or dead. Coco signed, dead, draped. Draped means covered up. Then they asked, where do animals go when they die? And then Coco said, a comfortable hole. And then she gave a kiss goodbye. Yeah, philosophical debates followed, of course, because what was she referring to here? Was Coco being referred to being put into the ground, literally? Or was she talking about an afterlife? A comfortable hole in the afterlife world? I don't know. Gorillas are so smart. And again, so strong. Number 9, Derek Amato. What started with tragedy ended in symphony. Here we go. I had no idea this was possible, and now I'm questioning everything. Derek Amato is a self-taught pianist who gained worldwide attention after a traumatic brain injury caused him to develop acquired Savant syndrome. Derek was diving into a shallow pool back in 2006. Now, his concussion actually made him lose some of his hair and some of his memory. It was bad. But in a bizarre turn of events after the accident, Derek became a musical genius. Guy was killer on the keys, who knew? This condition allowed him to access exceptional music abilities that were for sure not around before the accident. Amato actually released his own album titled Life in the Keys. That's incredible. Tried so many times. Number 8, Catullin. A Mongol princess and descendant of Genghis Khan. Let's talk about her. Catullin is known in history for her undefeated wrestling abilities, if you can say that. She was said to have issued a challenge to any man who wanted to marry her, stating that they first must defeat her in a wrestling match. Now, despite many attempts by many men, Catullin reportedly remained undefeated, with some accounts suggesting she won as many as 10,000 matches. Yeah, Tinder, but make it exhausting. Sure. Instead of a super swipe, she's getting your legs swiped? I don't know. A super choke? Her story has become a legendary tale of strength and independence in Mongolian history. And also, how terrifying is that woman? Imagine being like number 6,000. You're like, I don't think I'm gonna do it. I don't think I'm gonna tap her out. I really have no clue. Number 7, Hector. I'm not referring to the Greek hero Hector. No, not this time. Not this time, Bumblebee. No, I'm referring to the cloud that was named after him. Yeah, we're talking about clouds now because, why not? Hector is a famous cloud formation that appears in the Tiwi Islands of Australia. Now, the cloud appears from September to March every single year, every single day, which is terrifying. What's going on here? The area's unique weather patterns are quite the spectacle. The name Hector's thunderstorm, or simply Hector, which I'm more fond of, that name also comes from a powerful storm that struck the area back in 1930s. A World War II pilot named it Hector, and that's how memorable it was. It's still going strong today. Yeah, today, even right now, I guess, yeah, Hector is still going. Tomorrow, Hector's gonna disappear. It's the last day to catch Hector. It's right now. Go get your last minute views in to Hector. That's crazy. I didn't realize that was today. At this point, he's a popular tourist attraction. Visitors can go and take boat tours to witness the spectacular lightning displays surrounding the storm. Me personally, I want nothing to do with that. I watched Nope recently, so this one freaked me out. I don't like clouds that show up on the regular. I don't know. Clouds with a schedule, I'm all set. This next one here, kind of the same kind of thing. Here we go. Number 6, Medieval Sky Battle. This might happen soon. I don't know. Aliens, who knows? Short and sweet, this one. This looks like the inside of my old high school locker, first of all, but this is actually medieval art. This Nuremberg broadsheet shows us a battle, an Avengers level threat, really, if anything. This battle took place apparently on April 14th, 1561. It was an aerial battle involving, I don't know, globes, crosses, tubes. You tell me, I don't know what's going on in the sky, but Iron Man is nowhere to be found. These cigar-shaped UFOs have been breaking the internet recently, and I'm not gonna lie, they kind of look like what we're seeing in that medieval art. Maybe this is the same vehicle. Maybe it's the same battle. Maybe it's gonna happen again. People viewed this event as a divine warning. Yeah, obviously, you don't say. What else are you gonna call that? UFO is flying around, someone's like, I have a bad feeling, Abraham. I don't know, this looks a little odd. Number 5, Enlisted Bear. During World War II, a Polish army unit enlisted a real-life Syrian brown bear named Wojciech to serve with them. Because, yeah, what could go wrong, right? I just watched that bear movie, I don't know. Wojciech had been found as a cub in Iran by Polish soldiers and, of course, adopted as their very own mascot. Again, sure, why not? Now, as he grew up, Washtek became an integral part of the unit, right? He helped carry around ammunition and other heavy supplies that only a bear could carry. Fair, I guess. And he quickly became popular among the soldiers. They all loved him. They would play with him and feed him cigarettes and beer, you named it. He loved it all. He'd eat the glass, probably. He even learned how to salute, a skill he would often perform when given a bottle of beer. He's like, thank you, sir. And he'd open it on his nails. So scary, so scary. Washtek's presence helped boost the morale of soldiers, and he became a beloved symbol of the unit's fighting spirit, because why, of course he did. After the war, Washtek was demobilized along with the rest of the unit, and then he spent the rest of his life at the Edinburgh Zoo in Scotland, where he continued to be a, of course, popular attraction. He's like still saluting people and stuff. They're like, it's all good, man, it's all good, you're safe now, you can chill. Today, he's still celebrated as a symbol of the bond between animals and humans in times of war. That's crazy. They got a real life bear to do that. It's terrifying. I just watched a movie about a bear doing some crazy stuff with some illicit substances, and it seemed way scarier than that somehow. Number 4, Violet Jessup. Violet Jessup was a British ocean liner stewardess who somehow survived 3 major shipwrecks in the early 20th century. Not 1, not 2, 3. That's crazy. She's known for all these incredible tales of survival and her courage in the face of disaster, again, numerous times. First off, 1912, Jessup was working on board the RMS Titanic when it of course hit an iceberg and sank in the North Atlantic Ocean. She managed to escape on one of the lifeboats, one of the few lifeboats, might I add, and survived the disaster. Just a few years later, 1916, she was working on the HMS Britannic when it struck a mine and sank in the Aegean Sea. Again, Jessup survived and managed to make it to safety. Somehow. Now at this point you're like, okay, she's not gonna do it a 3rd time, right? No possible way. In 1940, Jessup was working on board the RMS Queen Mary when it too collided with another ship and suffered significant damage. So once again, Jessup survived another disaster and went on to work another ocean liner for many years. Yeah, she still worked on ocean liners after all 3 of those. She's like, oh, it is what it is. Like, what? Are you kidding me? Jessup's incredible tale of survival has of course made her a legendary figure in the history of ocean travel and a symbol of courage and resilience in the face of disaster. I'm baffled by this. That's crazy. You think after the 2nd one you definitely quit, right? Incredible, incredible. Number 3, the divot box. I don't like haunted items. This one here, definitely a haunted item. My ears are draining as I'm doing this, so I'm like, ah. It's getting louder all of a sudden. This small wine cabinet got some attention after being sold on eBay back in 2003. Yeah, remember eBay? Me neither. The box was purchased by Kevin Mannis. Now, shortly after, he claimed that said box was haunted and had caused him and his family to experience a series of horrifying events and health problems. And of course, paranormal activity. How do you sell that? Hey, want this? No, not at all. Sounds like it's a terrible idea. He eventually sold the box to Jason Haxton, who ended up writing a book about his experience. Yeah, it was that bad. Some believe that opening this box can release malevolent spirits into the world. Now, its origins here go back to a woman who survived World War II. This box came from her estate. So the history behind it, it's dark and it's seen some days, that's for sure. And now it lives at the Haunted Museum, rightfully so. Remember that viral video of Post Malone touching this random haunted artifact? That was this box. That was the same one. Now he's falling off stage and stuff. No idea what's going on with Post. Zach Baggins, please keep an eye on this box. Thank you so much. Hit that thumbs up for ghost-proof glass. We really like that. It's the same glass they used in the movie 13 Ghosts. They just have that around the Dybbuk box. Matthew Lillard watches it the whole time. It's lovely. Number 2, Pompeii eruption. Let's hope this one doesn't happen again, because hot. Once a flourishing Roman city located near the Bay of Naples in Italy, that was, of course, until 79 AD, when Mount Vesuvius decided, I'm gonna explode. I'm gonna go off and bury the entire city and all its inhabitants under layers and layers of ash and pumice. How scary and horrible is that? The eruption was so powerful that it wiped out all life within a 16-mile radius. Yeah, it makes you think about Yellowstone National Park a bit, doesn't it? Or if it's terrifying, she does some random shit. Pompeii remained buried and forgotten for almost 1700 years until it was rediscovered in 1748. Today, Pompeii is, honestly, it's amazing. It's an archaeological site that offers a glimpse into ancient Roman life with well-preserved ruins of homes, public buildings, streets, artwork, you name it. There's a restaurant that's open now. They reopened a restaurant they found buried. That's incredible. And there's also a great amount of people who steal from this ancient landmark because humans are so stupid. Yeah, how to get cursed. This is how you do it. Listen up. Tourists would steal fragments of monuments, literally pieces of the city. They would pull out and then put it in their pocket. Yeah, put a little bit of Rome and take it home on our flight. And then put out my lovely fireplace there. That's great. 100 packages a year will get sent back to the archaeological superintendents, most of them being accompanied with a letter explaining all the bad luck luck that occurred after they took the piece. Yeah, don't take haunted pieces of Rome home with you. Don't take Rome home. That's what they should say. I'm gonna make a shirt and say, it's because they don't take Rome home. Everyone's like, what does that even mean? I'm like, watch the video. I don't know, there's a QR code on the back, scan it. And finally, number 1, James Dean's haunted car. James Dean's love for fast cars was well known, but sadly, because one of them was haunted. Apparently, let's talk about that one. One of these cars ultimately led to his tragic death at the age of 24, but some are now convinced that all of his cars were cursed in some way, shape, or form. There's a car curse, if you want to call it that. Dean's first vehicle was a Triumph Tiger T110 motorcycle. Now, it was involved in an accident that left him with a broken leg, which, where I'm about to go with things, is not bad, considering. His next car, a Porsche 550 Spider, is the one that he famously died in after colliding head-on with another vehicle, much worse than a broken leg, in my opinion. Now, that's already tragic enough. That's dark history right there. Could probably end the point. But after Dean's death, things happened. Afterwards, the Porsche was sold off and quickly became infamous for causing more accidents and more weird deaths. One of its owners even reported seeing the ghost of James Dean sitting in the passenger seat shortly before they crashed. That's really jarring. That would make me crash. If I saw that beside me, I'd be like, okay, let's see you later. Now, that car disappeared from public view in the late 1960s and has since been rumored to be hidden away by some collector who believes it to be cursed. So great, out of sight, out of mind. We love that. Another Porsche that James Dean owned was destroyed when it caught fire while being transported by a trailer. So 2 haunted cars. But a third Porsche that he'd ordered never made it to him because it was involved in an accident during transportation that killed that driver. So whether you believe in curses or not, there's no denying that James Dean's car collection has some dark, tragic history. Something's going on there, for sure. I don't have my license, and you know what? After that last point, I'm walking everywhere. That's it. I'm just speed walking everywhere with that big goofy belt. That's it. None of this, just this. That's so stupid.
Number 10. Abe the Wrestler. At 20 years old with a record of 300 fights and 1 loss, he stands 6'4" inches at 185 pounds. Your future president of the United States, Honest Abe! The chair! Give him the chair! That's right, Abe Lincoln was quite the ruffian. However, the wrestling back then wasn't as organized, as there was no WWF per se. It was mostly just a show of strength and skill, but there were competitions among men. Huge crowds gathered, towns watched, everybody gambled. It was great. A little wrestling. His fights earned him respect while campaigning too. He would even scrap hecklers at debates. Yeah, just walks down midpoint and wheeler whips someone under their neck. His chirps were amazing too. He would just look at people like Gladiator and call them out. He'd be like, hey, I'm the big buck of this lick. If any of you want to try it, come on and get your wet horns. Yeah, I didn't think so. Sorry, Mr. Douglas, proceed. Thank you.
Number 9, Roy Sullivan. They say lightning never strikes the same place twice, but if you knew Roy Sullivan, you knew that's not entirely true. Yeah, meet the man who was struck by lightning 7 times and lived to tell the tale. Roy Sullivan was born in 1912. He sadly passed away in 1983 when he was 71 years old, but God tried a few times to get him out earlier, it seems. He was born in Greene County, Virginia. Roy was a park ranger in Shenandoah National Park in 1936. He was nicknamed the Human Lightning Conductor, and he appeared in the Guinness Book of World Records. Roy's first encounter with, the might of Thor was when he was just 30 years old at the Fire Lookout Tower. He said that lightning strike, again, out of the 7 he survived, was the most painful out of all of them. The lightning bolt burned a strip all the way down his leg, even blowing a hole through his shoe. Yet somehow he survived. Roy was also hit by lightning in 1969 while driving a truck, and also in 1970 while gardening on an otherwise clear day like today. Also in 1972 while inside a guardhouse. Also in 1976 during another storm, and finally in 1977 while fishing. Yeah, Roy passed away in 1983, and to this day, 2 of his ranger hats are on display at the Guinness World exhibits in New York City and South Carolina. This man cheated death 8 times. 7.
Number 8. Miss Unsinkable. Violet Constance Jessup, aka the Queen of Sinking Ships, or Miss Unsinkable, was an Argentine-Irish woman who worked as an ocean liner stewardess, memoirist, and Red Cross nurse in the early 20th century. Jessup is well known for having survived 3 sinkings of major ships: the RMS Olympic in 1911, the RMS Titanic in 1912, and her sister the HMHS Britannic in 1916. Yeah, talk about the luckiest person ever. Lady's got some angels watching over her, I swear. The first ship, they turned around and made it back just in time. The Titanic, well, watch the movie, you'll understand. And then the third ship, It must have just felt personal by that point. Really? Not to mention barely surviving tuberculosis as a child. This woman is truly a saint. Returning to work after all those accidents, dedicating her entire life to the Red Cross, trying to save others. Sadly, she passed away at 83.
Number 7. Lost at Sea. The Robertson family, they're quite a historical one. Strap in, folks. Back in 1971, Dougal, Lynn, and their 4 children, Anne, Douglas, Neil, and Sandy, all set sail on what was planned to be a trip around the world. It sounds magnificent. Our family saw a movie once. Aboard their 13-meter boat, the Lucette, they traveled through the Caribbean and then across the Panama Canal to the Pacific, right? That was their trail. A year and a half went by, they were en route through the Galapagos, and one of the daughters, Anne, who was 18, decided to leave the voyage. Yeah, she's like, you know what? I'm actually not on board for this anymore. I'm really seasick, bye. And then in Panama, they took on a hitchhiker named Robin Williams. Great name. This hitchhiker was in for more of an adventure than they thought, because after this point, their lives were never the same again. West of the Galapagos Islands, a pod of killer whales struck the boat. Wood then began to crack and the boat subsequently started to sink. They all moved to the inflatable life raft, but after 16 days of using their own breath to keep inflating it over and over 24/7, the 6 of them were sadly forced to relocate into an even smaller dinghy. Then they somehow survived for 38 days at sea, while sailing towards the center of the Pacific with no goal in mind other than to survive. All they had to drink was some water left over from the Lucette, with sea turtles being their only diet. Yeah, save the turtles, unless of course you're stranded at sea. Then in that case, sorry to 52 of you. Finally, after 38 days, they were spotted by a passing Japanese fishing boat, and then thankfully they were rescued.
Number 6. Mad Jack Churchill. No, not that Churchill, but equally as British and even bolder. Mad Jack Churchill, aka John Malcolm Thorpe Fleming Churchill, was a British Army officer who fought in the Second World War with a longbow, bagpipes, and a Scottish broadsword. Dude, this guy lived a life. Was in like every war. Trained people how to fight and how to parachute. This guy was fighting machine guns with a bow and a sword, and was at like the front of the lines, leading them, taunting people, playing the bagpipes. You know how intimidating that is? How is there not like 15 movies about this guy? Not only did he thrive in the rough stuff, guy revolutionized surfing. He was also pissed the Americans dropped some nukes. He wanted to keep fighting, you know? Like imagine that pep talk. Alright lads, I'm gonna play a wee jingle here first, and then I'm gonna go out, take this sword, and I'm gonna start swinging. Alright? Good luck.
Number 5. Fake friends. Towards the end of World War I, Paris was tired of, seeing their city of love get blown to smithereens, as one would. So they figured, you know what? Let's try and fool those Germans, right? Let's try and do some trickery. Let's just build a fake Paris and then shut out all the lights. And it worked. Yeah, they psyched them out. They created a decoy, a very large decoy. The life-size stunt double was posted up only a few miles west of the actual city in order to protect it. This tiny town called Masons Lafayette, now of course it's looking a lot more full than it was when it was, a hollow shell of a fake town. Now it's a tourist area. There were once 3 different zones set up around the real Paris. Zone A was northeast of the city, had fake train stations, mimicked a suburban region of St. Denis, but it had a big fake Gare du Nord train station, right? That was the main pull. Like, hey, come on, we're looking nice and hopeful, come attack us, and it worked. Zone B, northwest of the city, that was Masons Lafayette, the main fake Paris, right? And Zone C was the industrial area, just east of the city. They had massive factories built with, obviously nothing inside of them. This sounds pretty Home Alone when you think of it, but these missions only happening overnight, creating a light show with some big fancy props isn't a bad idea. It's gonna save a lot of lives and money. Lights were carefully spaced out so it looked like a breathing city from above, and they fell for it, for some of the time. They Looney Tuned the Germans, and it worked. They're like, yeah, it's Paris. Hit that really fast, it's good.
Number 4. Space junk. In 1961, John Glenn would become the first astronaut to successfully orbit in space. He lapped the Earth a couple times with the help of Friendship 7, NASA's command mission pushing ever closer and closer to the moon. While in space, Glenn and fellow crew noticed tiny gold particles that shone like fireflies. Quote, this is Friendship 7, try to describe what I'm seeing up here. It's a big mass of some very small particles that are brilliantly lit up like they're luminescent. I never saw anything like it. They're round a little, they're coming out of the capsule, and they just look like stars, a whole shower of them coming over. They had come to the conclusion it was liquid from inside the capsule and the suits leaking out. And that liquid was urine. Not aliens, not fireflies, not disintegrating ship frozen pee-pee. Yeah, gets drinking all that Tang all day. Glenn flew on Discovery in 1998 and became, at age 77, the oldest person to fly in space at the time. Damn Shatner.
Number 3, Project MDXX. If you've seen Project X, this one's gonna ring a bell or two. About 500 years ago, yep, you missed it, in 1520, for 2.5 weeks in June, both England's King Henry VIII and Francis I, two of the greatest monarchs in Renaissance Europe, they both threw a joint birthday party that lasted 18 days, and it only cost about $19 million by today's standards. Nice. I went mini putting for my 8th birthday. That's why I called it Project MDXX. The numerals in the year, yeah, you get it, not bad. Not only was this a chance for them to celebrate their friendship, but it was also a chance for them to try and outdo one another and continue to show off. So for this huge bash, for starters, around 12,000 people showed up and gathered in the fields of the northern tip of what is now France. All tents, costumes, decorations were all gold embellished. Guests were fed 29,000 fish, 98,000 eggs, 6,400 birds, 2,200 sheep, and 216,000 gallons of wine just to wash all that clout down. On top of that, there were jousts, wrestling matches, elaborate mask parties. I have FOMO just talking about it right now. The two kings both wanted to outdo each other, but there were rules put in place beforehand. These kings could not compete with one another during the celebrations, right? So instead they tried to outspend each other in a nice way. They're like, oh yes, look at all of my gold. No, look at all my gold. We love blowing all of our resources in 2.5 weeks. Nice. Looking good, guys. Keep it up.
Number 2, Olympic arts. In the early 20th century, the Olympics were getting creative, literally. Hundreds of years of blood, sport, and victorious games, and people were looking for some new events. 1912 Summer Olympics, they decided to add official awarded medals for painting, sculpture, architecture, literature, and music. Alright, one rule though, they had to be of Olympic sport nature. Paintings of people boxing, sculptures of people whipping discs around, and of course a couple doodles of some dudes playing rugby. Which won Gene Jacoby 2 gold medals. Of course, these were Olympic grade pieces of art, so you know they were the best of the best. Of course, you could compete in both sport and art. American athlete Walter Winans took the podium after winning gold in sharpshooting, and also the very first gold in sculpture. Yeah, lovely. He made a little bronze horse pulling a chariot. Isn't that nice? People just taping up their wrists, mouth guards in, and you're just sharpening your pencil. Hey, how are ya? About to draw. Good luck.
And finally, number 1, Jurassic Timeline. Alright, this one goes out to all the T-Rexes out there. If you're watching, hit that thumbs up with your little hands. Nice big reach. Hit that subscribe button. When we think of the times of the dinosaurs, we tend to think of all of them roaming the planet at one time, and then a meteor hit, and then they were all toast. But that is certainly not the case. It's a little shocking, but here's our timeline. Dinosaur communities were not only spread apart by geography, but also by time and the age of the dinosaurs. For one, it lasted so long that it included 3 separate geological time periods. It's a long time. Fun fact, there is more time separating the Tyrannosaurus rex from the Stegosaurus than there is separating the Tyrannosaurus rex from humans. Yeah, that's how long ago dinosaurs have been kicking, or not kicking rather, you know what I mean? We can't comprehend this time. Like, this is so far away, it doesn't even make sense. We think of the ancient Egyptians, we're like, oh, that's, I don't know. Dinosaurs? Stegosaurus, you know those herbivores with the plates on their back and the spiky tails? They always do this and take out your cars, whatever, Jurassic World, I've seen it. They roamed Earth 150 million years ago during the Jurassic period and the age of the dinosaurs. And then the T-Rex first appeared about 80 million years after the Stegosaurus had been extinct, and that was about, 67 million years ago from today. This means that while 80 million years separated those two, there's only 67 million years that separate us from a T-Rex. Crazy fact. Hit that thumbs up. Number 10, the first marathon. Now, the term marathon, right off the bat, it comes from ancient Greek history. The Battle of Marathon, I've certainly mentioned on this channel a few times. But let's look further a few hundred years, give or take. The first ever Olympics marathon, it was an absolute shit show. 7 miles from the finish line, one guy started ingesting strychnine and egg whites just so we could finish the race. So yeah, that was the first ever modern use of narcotics in an official Olympic game sport. One dude was also running the marathon marathon in dress shoes and dress pants. Just a classy lad with 58 blisters, just booking for hours at a time. William Garcia, one of the 32 competitors, straight up almost died during this marathon. He collapsed mid-race. He barely made a recovery. Have you done a marathon before? If so, tell me your experience down below. I did the Toronto Marathon a month ago and I got 35 kilometers out of 42. It was so close it hurt my soul. If only I wasn't wearing those dress shoes, you know, maybe I would have finished. So close. Number 9, Unsinkable Sam. In our last video, I asked who likes dogs and who likes cats and yada yada yada. This one here, I'll give to the cat people. You get one. Cats have 9 lives. I'm a firm believer in this theory now. Unsinkable Sam was the nickname for a cat who survived several shipwrecks during World War II. His tale began aboard a German warship called the Bismarck. Yeah, also imagine that image right there. 2,200 soldiers just standing in a line, and then also this black and white cat that somehow snuck aboard. Nobody knows how it got on, but I'm pretty sure one guy does. He's like, the Bismarck was decimated during one of the attacks, of course, and while the HMS Kozak was looking for survivors shortly after, they saw Oscar the cat on a plank. Yeah, he had to earn the Unsinkable Sam alias, alright? You get a new life, you get a new name, then it happens. The HMS Kozak hauled him aboard, but then several months later, the Kozak was destroyed. Now this time it was the HMS Ark Royal who spotted the cat, and then the fearless feline was dubbed Unsinkable Sam. Little man passed away in 1955, not on a warship, so that's great. Hope there's therapy in cat heaven. My god. He's like, well, 4 out of the 9 sucked. I don't know. Number 8, Robert Liston. In the early 19th century, crowds would gather to watch Dr. Robert Liston work, okay? They would huddle around like it was a dance battle. They get nice and close and breathe in each other's mouths. He was known as the fastest knife surgeon in the West. I know, how many red flags can you find already? A crowd, a fast surgery, this guy just in the middle of it. What's going on? Like, please help me, please put me together. I don't know. This was a time before anesthesia had been developed, so you wanted things wrapped up quick. Pun intended. Now, Robert, he would have you amputated and sutured in 3 minutes flat, right? Don't you want that? Don't you want a nice fast surgery? Mortality rate was 300%. Not great at all, in fact. And then one fateful day, Robert attempted to beat any record previously held. He was trying to perform the fastest surgery, but during so, he accidentally cut off his assistant's fingers as well as the patient's leg. So, I don't know what the guy's doing with his arms, but you're like, buddy, slow down. We got more than 3 minutes, it seems. He also hit somebody else watching by accident, you know what I mean? Remember how I said crowds would gather, the old surgery crowd? This is why you don't stand too close, okay? It's like crump battles. You get too close, you're getting nicked by something. Either Robert or some guy in Tim's. Both are gonna hurt. I'm glad surgeons are taking their time now. I'm also glad no surgeons are trying new experiments at a record time. That's also nice. Can you take your time, please? Number 7, the first open heart surgery. Moving on to some other surgeons, a little better, hopefully. We've discussed ancient Egyptians and how they would clean the entire body out for the whole mummification process and then put the heart back in. Now, of course, they weren't alive during any of this, but when was the first open heart surgery? When did that happen? What did that room look like? The first successful open heart surgery went down in Chicago in 1893. It was honestly unbelievable. The patient was a man named James Cornish. He got a knife wound to the chest during a brawl. It was probably Robert Liston just doing his thing. Maybe he got too close, I don't know. And the surgeon, Dr. Daniel Williams, who by the way used to be a shoemaker's assistant, he saved this man's life and he also made history. In the city's first interracial hospital too, might I add, so a lot of firsts happening in this one. Now there weren't any textbooks on this type of operation at the time, so the odds of survival of course were extremely low. In fact, there weren't any odds at all. Right? No x-rays, no antibiotics, no anesthesia, no problem, right? Using just a scalpel, Dr. Williams cut through his chest, weaved through all the nerves, slowly, might I add, thankfully. He weaved through muscles, ribs, everything until eventually he closed a severed artery right near the heart. Cornish survived, thankfully, and come 1894, Williams was promoted to chief surgeon at the Freedmen's Hospital in Washington, D.C. Imagine he went back to being a shoemaker's assistant. He's like, all right, cool. Now I want those shoes. Number 6, the Pfizer Fine. When we think of the name Pfizer now, there's obviously mixed feelings, pun intended. But back in 2009, before they were making cures, they were paying some hefty fines. The world's largest pharmaceutical company had to pay a record-breaking fine. They had to pay $2.3 billion in criminal and civil penalties over unlawful prescription drug promotions. Now included in this mighty slap on the wrist was a $1.2 billion criminal fee. Now if that didn't sound bad enough, in the agreement was also a criminal forfeiture of $105 million. So you're paying and you're also getting more stuff taken away. It's all bad. This was the 4th time Pfizer got charged with this magnitude in a decade. They were on a pretty bad streak. What got them in hot water in the first place is that they would promote their products at resorts, right? They would invite doctors to these meetings, give them golf, massages, whatever. They would pepper you up nice so that you were Team Pfizer by the end of the trip. And you were all tanned. You looked nice, right? FBI Assistant Director Kevin Perkins says the corporate giant was blatantly violating the law and misleading the public through false marketing claims. Number 5, no birds at the funeral. If you ever want to liven up a funeral, try bringing a parrot. They love to heckle, turns out. Former President Andrew Jackson, he passed away a long time ago. He passed away in 1845. Now, it's important to note that he passed away before his pet did. He passed away before his pet parrot died. So the parrot, of course, attended the funeral, right? How lovely, right? I bet after I said that, you said, oh, maybe you gave it a thumbs up, maybe you subscribed. Good stuff going around, right? It's lovely. Thing is, the parrot loved to swear. Yeah, he had a few curse words in his back pocket. This parrot actually heckled so much during the funeral that they had to remove it. How epic is that? Got kicked out like it was a comedy club. They're like, all right, put your wings behind your little bird neck, we're out of here. Number 4, illegal pedestrian crossing. I see this far too often living in the city. Toronto is wild for this. It drives me crazy. People jaywalking. Looks like there's not a truck coming your way. They do that little wave, a little smile, a little weird walk, and they just go wherever they want. Middle of a Toronto intersection, they're like, hey, I'm 92, see ya. Everyone's slamming their brakes, avoiding them all of a sudden. You're holding up traffic even more. Now, in China, jaywalking, that's a no-go. Article 40 of Beijing's traffic law stipulates that drivers in motor vehicles cannot suddenly stop even if it's at a crosswalk. So yeah, you can't even stop when you're at a crosswalk. You have to wait for cars. So if you're not in a car, you have to wait. You don't get the right of way automatically, like, you know, most of the time. And for drivers, it's forbidden to stop at these crossings. You gotta just keep going. If you do, you're getting a fine. Hopefully just a warning, but possibly a fine for stopping at a crosswalk. How insane is that? Number 3, raining coffee. The sky is falling. Sometimes it's frozen lizards and sometimes it's bugs. But you know what? Sometimes maybe coffee will fall from the sky. I don't know. Get your mugs ready. We're waking up early tomorrow. I don't know. Back in 1969, a South Carolina factory was busy. The non-dairy creamer, Cremora, was doing great production-wise, but they didn't have the greatest air vents in the factory. All of a sudden, the powder mixture leaked out one day, went into the air, where it then mixed with falling rain, and voila. Now we have double doubles falling from the clouds. Now we have a really odd rainfall. Chester, South Carolina. It was the day we woke up to coffee goop on our lawns instead of dew. That's memorable for sure. The company ended up paying a fine of $4,000 for allowing their product to be released from the plant. Could have been worse. Could have been a lot worse. Could have been a spider factory. I don't know. First thing I can think of. Number 2, they can't stop all of us. Remember that Area 51 raid that went down back in 2019? Months of planning, gathering heads, planning trips, renting cars, all to get everyone out to Nevada. Everyone was determined to find out the truth about aliens. It was a big raid where everyone planned to overthrow every Area 51 guard. So, did it work? What ended up happening there? I forget.
Everyone! We're not here for photos! We're here to rescue the aliens! Rescue!
Yeah, okay, it didn't work. Turns out a handful of gamers can't overthrow a government military base. Who knew? Shoot, maybe next time, I don't know. So what was the goal here? 1.5 million people signed up to storm Area 51 in 2019, but this wasn't the first time something like this happened. Back in the 1950s, the public also wanted answers. It was June 17th, 1959, and the Rizzo Evening Gazette published a story with the headline reading, "More flying objects seen in Clark's sky." That's pretty alarming. Then the paper went on to describe how Sergeant Wayne Anderson, a local sheriff, was one of many who spotted what the paper described as an object bright green in color and descending towards the earth at a speed too great to be an airplane. Yeah, I just watched Jordan Peele's Note. Couldn't have done this list at a better time if you ask me. What did they see? It was green, it was close, was it Optimus Prime just coming to say what's up? I need answers, folks. And finally, number 1, Tombstones ashore. Here we go, death is calling. Back in 2012, the world thankfully did not end, but if you believed that it was going to, this definitely would have freaked you out. Back in May 2012, 2 friends were on a nice beach walk right on the coast of San Francisco's Ocean Beach. Now, when all of a sudden something that looked like a fridge started to crash through the waves and then onto the shore. Now it turns out it was not a fridge. That would have been lovely. It would have been a nice surprise. Just some fridge goods popping out from 1976. It turns out it was a massive tombstone from the year 1876. It was a little more haunting than a fridge. The tomb originally belonged to Emma Bosworth, and then just 1 month later, Another stone was found, this time with a different name. Of course, that'd be weird if it was the same name again. And then another one, and then another one. So what's going on here? The next tombstone belonged to Delia Presby Oliver from 1890. But the condition that they were in also, these tombstones, they looked brand new. You probably expect as I'm describing this that they're all old and broken apart. Nope. They're all pristine, even more haunting almost. I don't know. These tombstones came from the Laurel Hill Cemetery after it had shut its gates in 1940, so the headstones were then used as a makeshift seawall. If you ask me, that's a little rude. Your uncle's tombstone just covered in barnacles like he's Davy Jones? No thanks. Pop that out, put that back, draw that out.
In our number 10 spot today, we have lobotomies. Did you know that it used to be common practice for people to just get a part of their brain cut out? Okay, well maybe not common, but it wasn't as uncommon as you would hope. Lobotomies used to be considered an excellent and efficient cure for things such as mental health problems, which thankfully is a practice that has not survived for a very good reason. Of course, in modern medicine, lobotomies still exist, but only when actually necessary, and there is of course a lot more knowledge about the dangers and effects. One well-known person to have undergone one of these procedures was Rosemary Kennedy, who was John F. Kennedy's sister. She was experiencing seizures as well as mood swings, and while these seizures certainly were something that needed to be looked after for her health, I'm not sure if the mood swings necessarily needed some kind of medical intervention. Anyways, to quote-unquote cure her, they had a lobotomy performed on her. This procedure left her with the mental capacity of a 2-year-old, and she could no longer speak or walk properly. After this, she spent most of her life hidden away, and it was thought that her family did this because they were ashamed of her, which is both horrible and so sad. In our number 9 spot today, we have the Posthumous Execution. Okay, so this is something that has actually happened more than once, but I just found out it's happened at all, and I'm both slightly confused and absolutely disgusted at the idea, so I needed to share one example with you guys. So there was a man named Oliver Cromwell, who Wikipedia describes as, quote, an English general and statesman who, first as a subordinate and later as commander-in-chief, led armies of the Parliament of England against King Charles I during the English Civil War, subsequently ruling British Isles as Lord Protector from 1653 until his death in 1658. So, in 1658, Oliver passed away fairly suddenly, and his son Richard became Lord Protector, but because he now had a power base in Parliament or the army, he had to resign just the following year, which effectively ended the Protectorate. Since there was no clear leadership during this time, George Monk was able to have the Long Parliament restored. He then made some slight constitutional adjustments so that Charles II could be invited back from exile in 1660 and actually be a king under a restored monarchy. So then on January 30th, 1661, on what was the 12th anniversary of the execution of King Charles I, Oliver's body was exhumed and executed posthumously. They killed a dead guy. I get that it's like symbolic, but it's just like a little redundant, don't we think? Anyway, his head was cut off and displayed outside of Westminster Hall until 1685. Afterwards, it had a series of different owners, which only adds to the oddity of the story. In our number 8 spot today, we have Agent Orange. Agent Orange is not Cody Banks' cousin, but it was an extremely potent herbicide used from 1961 to 1971 in the Vietnam War. It was intended to cut through the canopy of thick foliage in Vietnam in order to reveal the troops underneath, but instead it proved to be extremely deadly to humans. It caused cancers, birth defects, and so many more different health issues. It's not like it was just a little bit either. 21 million gallons of it were sprayed over Vietnam, which affected hundreds of thousands of Vietnamese citizens, and it also affected the US veterans who faced exposure as well. While this is a dark part of history and it's really difficult to hear about, it's also important that we don't forget things like this. Knowing our history is so important so we don't make the same mistakes again. In our number 7 spot today, we have the Red Summer. The Red Summer is something I didn't even hear mentioned in school, which is honestly absolutely shocking. I'm hoping this is something that is more commonly taught than I think it is, because it really is important. The Red Summer is the term used to refer to the period from the late winter through to the early autumn of 1919, in which white supremacist terrorism and racial riots took place in more than 3 dozen cities across America. Some of the more well-known race riots that took place during the Red Summer were the Chicago, Washington, D.C. riots. These anti-black riots are said to have developed from a multitude of post-World War I tensions, such as the economic slump and the competition in job and housing markets. In 1919, it certainly wasn't uncommon for there to be race riots and a multitude of white-on-black violence, but the Red Summer really marked some of the first race riots in which black people in number stood up to the white supremacy, resisted, and fought back. During the Red Summer, a civil rights activist named A. Philip Randolph publicly defended the right of black people to self-defense. It is said that between January 1st and September 14th of 1919, white mobs at least 43 black Americans, but despite this, the states refused to interfere or prosecute these mobs. Considering how many race riots went on during this summer, we truly could dedicate an entire video to the Red Summer. It is insane to think about how recent 1919 really was, and while we certainly have come a long way, there's always more work to be done, and part of the work involves us learning about these horrible histories and what has happened in our past. In our number 6 spot today, we have King Gojong of Yu. King Gojong of Yu had his reign from 496 BC until 465 BC. His reign took place during what was arguably the last major conflict of the spring and autumn period, and he was able to lead his state to victory, but it certainly wasn't an easy road or without some very creepy happenings. The major conflict he led his state through was the war between Wu and Yu, which started when a Yu princess, who was married to a prince of Wu, left her husband and fled back to Yu. I mean, this of course wasn't the only thing that caused the war, but it certainly sparked the fire. The king was an extremely humble king, as he wouldn't relish in the riches he had as most royals would. Instead, he ate the same food as peasants and often would leave himself hungry in order to remember that he was in a position to serve his state. Okay, so you might be sitting there wondering when I'm gonna get to the scary historical event you came to this video for, so here it is. As I mentioned before, he was able to lead his state to victory, but of course a war involves a lot of sacrifice and some pretty horrific happenings. The king's army was very well known for their ability to scare their enemies before a battle began, and this is because their front line consisted of criminals who had been sentenced to death. In this time, there wasn't lethal injection or the electric chair, so naturally, it was a lot more of a vicious process. These criminals would decapitate themselves in front of the enemy army. Yep, I think this is probably the definition of a scary historical event. I can't even imagine witnessing something like that and then having to proceed with a battle against the army that has people doing that sort of thing. The king was certainly not a leader who wasted any time messing around. In our number 5 spot today, we have the hostage crisis. In 1980, America saw Ronald Reagan win the presidential election over former President Jimmy Carter, but there was a crisis going on that was taking the attention of Americans everywhere. The Iran hostage crisis is well known in American history, and it began on November 4th, 1979, when 52 American diplomats and citizens were held hostage by a group of militarized Iranian college students who took over the US Embassy in Tehran. The 444 days these Americans were held hostage is something I'm sure a lot of Americans learned about at some point or another, but the release of the hostages is what sometimes gets a little murky in the history books. The hostages were released on January 20th, 1981, which was the day that Reagan was inaugurated. There were people who believed that the hostages were released because Reagan was simply just more powerful than Jimmy Carter. Basically what I'm trying to say is that Reagan received a ton of credit for the release of the hostages, but truthfully, it barely had anything to do with him. The Carter administration had been attempting to negotiate with them for months, but they hated Carter because he had provided aid to the former monarch of Iran and had also failed an attempt to rescue the hostages before. So while they certainly were released on Inauguration Day, it had way less to do with Ronald Reagan and more to do with them just absolutely hating Jimmy Carter. In our number 4 spot today, we have the zombie virus. I know The Walking Dead is a popular series, but none of us dream of living in that world. I mean, at least I hope not. What a literal nightmare. That is why in 2017, when the UK discovered that many of their caterpillars were falling victim to what became known as zombie virus, we all said, we've had enough. Especially now that we've all gone through a pandemic. That kind of energy just needs to stay as far away from us as possible. The caterpillars were being infected with baculovirus, which stops their molting and encourages them to continue eating. Once they've eaten a bunch and they're full to the brim, the virus then tells them to head high onto a leaf, which, like, if we weren't talking about a virus that's killing them, that would be like the cutest little sentence, just like high on a little leaf. Anyway, it's not cute and it's sad. Basically, once on their leaf, if a bird doesn't snatch snatch them up. Warning, this is kind of gross. Their body liquefies and explodes, and then the virus is spread onto the other caterpillars below. Yeah, see, let's all move on and forget it ever happened. The caterpillars are good, everyone's fine. In our number 3 spot today, we have the Prohibition poisoning. I'm sure most of us learned about the Prohibition at some point in school, which of course was the outlaw of the consumption of alcohol, which was done with a ban being placed on the production, importation, transportation, and sale of alcohol by the US government from 1920 to 1933. But it's just as well known that this ban certainly did not stop people from producing or consuming alcohol, it was just done in sneakier ways. The black market for alcohol was booming as people began to drink redistilled industrial alcohol instead. This is all pretty well known, but one super sketchy thing that is definitely less well known is something that government agencies did to curb the black market sales of alcohol. Basically, they poisoned the industrial alcohol that was being repurposed for drinking, and not just poisoned in a way where the drinker would get sick, which is already horrendous enough, but they poisoned the alcohol with lethal chemicals. It is thought that by the time the Prohibition ended, at least 10,000 people died from this. This event is still one of the strangest and deadliest decisions made by government officials. In our number 2 spot today, we have the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory Fire. New York City's Triangle Shirtwaist Factory Fire in 1911 was an unbelievably terrible incident that led to changes being made for factory workers in America. The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory was located on the 8th, 9th, and 10th floors of a building in Greenwich Village, and it of course was where shirtwaists were being made, which we would now call a woman's blouse. I call this place a factory, but it was definitely more like a sweatshop, and the employees were mostly comprised of young women. So, like I mentioned before, in 1911 there was unfortunately a fire that broke out on the 8th floor, and because of the cramped and unsafe working conditions, the fire ended up claiming the lives of 146 people that day, which is just horrible. After more details came out about the incident and how terrible the working conditions were, protests broke out all around the city. People began demanding better for the women who had to work in these kinds of places. Like, just as an example, the doors to the stairwells and exits were locked so that employees couldn't take unauthorized breaks. How unbelievable is that? And the worst part is that the owners of the company, who were largely responsible for what happened that day, basically just got off scot-free. In our number 1 spot today, we have internment camps. This is something that might be more well known than I think it is, but in my Canadian education, it wasn't something we talked about at all, which is kind of shocking. During World War II, President Franklin Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, which would cause 117,000 Japanese Americans to have to give up their homes, jobs, and businesses and move to internment camps. This was due to the fear of espionage after Pearl Harbor. This was truly one of the worst violations of civil rights in the 20th century, and the government didn't apologize for it until decades later, but they cited national security as the justification for their actions. Unfortunately, this was only the beginning, as other countries began to follow suit, with Canada, Mexico, Peru, Brazil, Chile, and Argentina all having their own versions of the same kind of atrocity. It is very surprising to me that this isn't something that is discussed more often, as it of course is something that would prove detrimental to the Japanese American community for decades to come.
Kicking off our list at number 10, John Lennon, or should I say Jay Lennon. Here we go. This one comes from 1966. Now, if you're a Beatles fan or a fan of the Lord, you're in for a treat. Here we go. You've definitely heard about this scandal, hopefully. During an interview with a UK newspaper, John Lennon started talking about the group and the band and how their popularity was on the rise. Normal band stuff, whatever, from John Lennon. But when Jay Lennon said the Beatles were more popular than J. Christ, well, people got upset. He didn't mean anything bad out of it, per se. He just noticed that the Christianity charts were on a decline around the world. Meanwhile, the Beatles are selling out left, right, and center. I get what he's trying to say, but yeah, he definitely messed up here. When a US newspaper printed this exchange months later, Christians were upset. More popular than Jesus. Look, I know what he's trying to say, but still, you can't say that ever. Some radio stations actually stopped playing the band's music altogether. Christians gathered in bonfires to burn albums. Jay Lennon, not Jay Christ, but Jay Lennon, had to apologize numerous times at press conferences. He had to clear everything up just to move on, get some peace, get some forgiveness from the Lord. Number 9, Natalie Wood's death. Natalie Wood was one of the most talented in Hollywood. The actress was in her early 20s and already she was getting Oscar nominations. She's known for West Side Story and Rebel Without a Cause, but when she was 43 years old, Natalie was sailing with her husband, Robert Wagner. They were sailing off Catalina Island in California, and she lost her life. Now, her death was considered an accident at the time. With very little details, it was classified as an accidental drowning. But come 2013, it was changed. It was changed to drowning and other undetermined factors. Wood, her husband Wagner, and Christopher Walken, yeah, who knew? They were all aboard the 60-foot yacht at the time, November 28, 1981. The three actors had dinner in the harbor, then returned to the yacht to continue drinking and eating. Wood went missing around midnight, but the new information is that the couple had argued earlier that night. Now, this changes things, right? This changes the whole story. And according to a new report, that same report that was changed in 2013 after a different statement was released from the ship's captain, bruises and scratches that were considered fresh were seen on Wood's body. Wood was officially reported missing at 1:30 in the morning that night. So, a lot of questions, but I don't know. How do you solve that? How many years later? Number 8, the isolator. All right, a little different, but still definitely weird. This image may seem haunting at first, but it's actually quite ahead of its time. The isolator came long before noise-canceling headphones or lo-fi beats to study and relax to. This goofy-looking helmet was intended to block out noise and finally allow you to concentrate on finishing that Victorian-era paper due the next day. Now, this was back in the early to mid-1900s when inventor Hugh Gernsback worked hours and hours to create this study buddy to block out distractions in life. Now, this is a powerful image because the things that distract us today, like Instagram, Messenger, dating apps, YouTube, none of those things were even a concept back in 1925 when this device was revealed to the public. So you can only imagine what we need now, right? We need like the ultimate isolator. It's just a motorcycle helmet. It's just Daft Punk's helmet turned off, really. That's all we need. Number 7, Mary Pickford. Now, I mentioned earlier how these celebrity scandals often came from their love life, and then they have to, maybe there's some stuff happening, maybe they were arguing before, that changes the game. Everyone cares about who's dating who and who's divorcing who. I mean, look how often we bring up Pete Davidson today. I mean, how's the guy doing it? Really, how's he doing it? Now, as hard as it is, we can't judge people off a headline or a scandal or whatever we see. We don't know the full story at all, regardless of what it looks like or what we want it to look like. The silent film star divorced her husband, Owen Moore, around the 1920s, and then she married a man named Douglas Fairbanks right after. Now, when I say right after, I mean less than a month right after. Like Pete Davidson speed. I'll admit that would interest me as well. I'd have my own opinion, sure. Now, the public, at first, they weren't happy with Mary Pickford. They made assumptions about how long this affair had been going on. Oh, she was married, how could she, yada yada yada. Her career was actually on the line because of this scandal, and that was until Owen Moore was confirmed to be a not so great guy. Turns out throughout their marriage, he was a towards Mary. So she went from being almost canceled with no job to the most courageous for telling her story, how the tides have turned. Number 6, portable holding cell. Prisoner transport is always a risky game, right? I have YouTube, I see some stuff that goes on online, it's crazy. When out in public in any way, the odds that something goes wrong or they escape back into the real world and run away, it goes up significantly. The movie Con Air is about this exact situation unfolding. A timeless classic. Nicolas Cage, so good. Dave Chappelle's in that too, wild. Well, back in the 1920s, we didn't have SWAT teams move around the worst of the worst. Instead, we had bike cops with cages. It's pretty funny. This portable jail cell is an early version of our modern day police car. The concept was perfect, but the fact that this guy is sitting in a cell and can just grab the officer on the bicycle at any given moment, that's not so ideal. The fact that he's less than a foot away, that's not relaxing at all. Would you ever ride in one of these? I can barely do a sidecar in a motorcycle, let alone pegs on a bike. I don't know. If I'm not riding, I'm not on the bike, ever. Number 5, the Prohibition Era. The Prohibition Era was a time where there were restrictions placed on the consumption of alcohol, which of course was done with a ban being placed on the production, importation, transportation, whatever portation, and sale of alcohol by the US government, all from 1920 to 1933. A real boring time. Not really, no one listened to it. Of course, this ban certainly didn't stop people from producing or consuming alcohol, it was just done in sneakier, unsafer ways. The black market for alcohol was booming as people began to drink redistilled industrial alcohol instead of, normal drinkable stuff. This is all pretty well known, but one super sketchy thing that's not widely known is something that the government agencies did to curb the black market sales. They poisoned the industrial alcohol on purpose that was being repurposed for drinking. So, yeah, some villain stuff right there. Not just poison in a way where the consumer would get sick and maybe not want to drink it anymore, which is already horrendous enough, but they poisoned the alcohol with lethal chemicals. It is thought that by the time that Prohibition ended, at least 10,000 people died from this act alone. This event is still one of the strangest and deadliest decisions made by government officials today. I mean, cut to today, everything's legal now it seems, but there was a time where it wasn't. Number 4, not every state. Being a Canadian, at least, we're seeing things become legal all of a sudden, and that's weird. I'm 28 years old and I'm like, what? This is legal now? Okay, that's weird. It's odd, but we saw this happen in Prohibition as well. Many governors at the time refused to throw away money towards enforcing or policing this alcohol ban. Maryland, for example. Okay, Maryland never even enacted the enforcement code in the first place and eventually earned a reputation as the most stubborn anti-prohibition state in the Union. Nice. New York followed and repealed its measures in 1923, and slowly but surely, it all just went away. But some states did the opposite. They were all for the ban. Yeah, nerds. Kansas and Oklahoma remained dry until 1948 and 1958, and Mississippi remained alcohol-free until 1966. That's like 33 years after the passage of the 21st Amendment. Like, God, can we click refresh? Can we move on? I'm very thirsty. Thank you. Number 3, the Kensington System. All right, Queen Victoria, let's talk about you a little bit. Victoria was brought up under the Kensington System, which if you haven't heard of it before, it's pretty awful. Yeah, I thought I was grounded growing up. This is... Whew. Victoria's mother, Duchess Victoria of Kent, created this Kensington system to control her daughter's life. I mean, she literally isolated this child from friends or family members, you name it. Her mother did this all to keep her pure. The system sounds awful. Her mother would monitor her every single action, including who she can see or even speak to. Victoria only had 2 friends growing up her entire life. She had her half-sister, Princess Feodora of Lennon, and the Duchess attendant, Sir John Conroy. Oh, and the Duchess's attendant, Sir John Conroy, well, his daughter, Victoria. 2 friends your entire life. That's awesome. I mean, I only had 3 friends growing up, but 2, that's just cruel. She shared a room with her mother until she was queen. She literally couldn't walk down the hall to go to the washroom without her mother being by her side. Victoria has reflected on her childhood, and she said that she hated John Conroy for manipulating her mother. She actually referred to him as demon incarnate. That's a hefty burn from Victoria. Number 2, Al Capone's brother. What's going on with that guy during the Prohibition era? What's the other side of the family doing this whole time? We don't hear about him. Siblings can be the exact same. My brother and I were the same person pretty much. Al Capone and his brother, they had to separate a little bit. They had to play different paths for a bit. Not homies for a bit, it seems. A little different. Al Capone's oldest brother was a prohibition enforcement agent. Yeah, how ironic is that? Al built a criminal empire built on illegal liquor in Chicago back in the 1920s, but Vincenzo, the eldest of the 6 Capone brothers, he had changed his name to Richard Joseph Hart, of course to hide his identity, and after working for a bit in the circus, Vincenzo settled in Homer, Nebraska in 1922, and eventually he was a special officer assigned to investigate bootlegging. Now after he lost his badge on suspicion of theft, Vincenzo reunited with the Capone family in 1940. He met back up with Al in Miami and started to get in on that family cash that he's been missing out on. And finally, number 1, ice mask. Today you can go on Amazon and get a therapeutic gel face mask for like $20. If you're stressed out or trying to avoid puffy eyes, bam, throw this in the freezer for a hot minute and you're set, just like that. You can make your own aloe vera honey gel mask if you feel like. Just click any vlogger that says the word wellness in their bio and well, good luck. Back in the 40s, Hollywood makeup artist Max Factor Jr. created the first ever face mask to reduce facial puffiness. Yeah, what a magician. And it looked way cooler too. Again, pun intended. They didn't use freezer gels back then, instead just, well, a bunch of ice cube shaped containers that froze individually on your face. It was an ice cube tray mask, rather. It was actually invented to fight hangovers. That's one of the main reasons. How fun is that? Now, it's a shame that this design never got, caught on because the ones today, they're no good. They're too cute. They're not cold enough or big enough. Imagine busting this mask out during a lecture. Imagine having this underneath the isolator. You could do anything you wanted. You can invent anything you wanted. I don't know, sound off below. Number 10, beauty sleep. When you go to bed at night, ideally you want 8 hours. Me, personally, I'm lucky if I get like 6. I don't know, I'm like a child. I'm restless at night. I'm kicking around, I'm making weird noises. It's insane, it's problematic. Maybe I should see someone. If this were medieval times, however, I'd be set. See, back in the Dark Ages, it was common to have 2 4-hour naps at night rather than one swift 8-hour slumber. See, many believe this was to tend to a fire, or hopefully not a fire. Gotta wake up, make sure things aren't gone. It's medieval times, it was rough. You wake up, throw a log on, yawn, and then hop back into your pile of hay. I don't know, whatever they had back then. Good times. This system of waking up after 4 hours, it sounds like an unhealthy inconvenience, but in reality, historical accounts suggest that people in the Dark Ages generally slept for longer periods of time, despite their sleep being interrupted by periods of wakefulness. They slept longer due to the fact that, light bulbs didn't exist yet, so lava lamps weren't a thing, neither were alarm clocks. So people would often go to bed shortly after sunset and wake up with the sunrise, so that's a good rest. That's a good medieval rest. That's like 12 hours. Number 9, the Norse Disappearance. I just watched The Norseman. I'm gonna start barking at people now when I'm on the subway, just to, get my old roots back, my old Norse roots. There are several theories regarding the disappearance of the Norse. Norse from Greenland during the Dark Ages, right? Where did they go? Where does a Norse Viking go? That's a little concerning. Where'd that guy go with the beard and the hatchet? That's a little important. One theory suggests that climate change played a significant role. The Little Ice Age, which began around the 14th century, that led to a decrease in temperature and a shorter growing season. Of course, making it difficult for the Norse to farm and raise livestock and, have that big mighty beard and eat good. This could have resulted in a decline in food production, leading to famine and ultimately the collapse of Norse settlement. Another theory suggests that the North were Another theory suggests that the Norse were unable to adapt to the harsh conditions of Greenland. The Norse were used to living in more temperate climates, and the extreme conditions of Greenland could have been too difficult for them to endure. They're a little too hot for comfort. Finally, there's a theory that the Norse were driven out by the Inuit, who had been migrating into Greenland around the same time as the North. So a little bit of a beef happened there, a little West Side Story with Vikings, if I may. The Inuit were skilled hunters and fishers, and their presence could have put pressure on the North settlement, ergo war. But it's likely that the combination of these factors contributed to the disappearance of the North altogether, so exact reason, that's still a mystery. I vote the Inuit though. There's probably some beef. There's probably some settlement beef. Number 8, Green Children of Woolpit. Now this is a medieval story that tells the tale of 2 children who randomly appeared in the village of Woolpit in England, but they showed up with green skin and they spoke an unknown language. So aliens confirmed, for sure aliens. I wouldn't even open that door. The children were taken in by a nice local landowner, and although they were initially very distressed and refused to eat any human foods, they eventually adapted to their new surroundings. Again, green children, didn't speak English, aliens. Reminder. The boy eventually learned to speak English over time, and he explained that he and his sister came from a land where the sun does not shine and everything was green. Yeah, it's like Avatar 3 going on. Something's going on out there. Sometimes the grass is greener on the other side, but sometimes the people are also green. That's fun. That's a fun little bit. Bunch of incredible hulks in a place where there's no sun. Sounds nice and warm and welcoming. Lovely. Let's find out more. The origins of the story, of course, remain a mystery, with various interpretations ranging from folklore to my personal favorite, extraterrestrial encounters. Love aliens, love that. Grew up watching Signs. You tell me in the comments, did this happen? Are these aliens? Were these just random children? Is this all bullshit? Who knows? Number 7, Shroud of Turin. The origins of the Shroud of Turin, a piece of cloth that bears the image of one Jesus Christ, a crucified man, shrouded in mystery it seems. According to tradition, the shroud was used to wrap the body of, again, one Jesus Christ after his crucifixion, and many Christians believe this right here to be the burial cloth of Christ. I pointed like I actually have it here. I don't have it here. I wish I did. That would be great. We get a lot of likes, but no, it's over there. However, its authenticity is the subject of ongoing debate, of course, because who really knows? The shroud first appeared in historical records in the 14th century, and it's been housed in Turin, Italy, since the late 16th century. Again, that's a pretty mighty piece of cloth right there. Next national treasure. Nicolas Cage has to grab that and put it in his pocket like a cowboy. Number 6, John Cabot's fate. John Cabot, he was an Italian explorer who sailed under the English flag, and he's known for his voyages to North America in the late 15th century. His final voyage in 1497, this was intended to establish English trade and settlements in the New World. But Cabot, he set out with a small fleet of ships from Bristol, England, and he sailed along the eastern coast of North America. However, something happened. He encountered difficulties, I guess one could say, including rough weather and a mutiny among his crew, which is much worse than a storm, I would say. And his fate remains unknown to this day. That rhymed, Dr. Seuss, love it. Some historians believe that Cabot may have perished at sea, while others speculate that he may have made it back to England and then died there. So, how did he go? Was he eaten? Who knows? Who really knows? Number 5. The plague. Yes, we just lived through one of these. Isn't that neat? Can't wait to tell my kids about that one. Plagues are everywhere throughout history. Some are short, some are impossibly incredibly long. The bubonic plague arrived to medieval England in 1348. Now the death toll here, it was devastating. We put up some crazy numbers in the last few years, don't get me wrong, but in the Dark Ages, the bubonic plague took out almost half of England's population. That's insane. They didn't even have Uber back then. You're like, how? How did that happen? Back then, the plague was a bacterium now known as Yersinia pestis. Symptoms were jarring, to say the least. There were lumps in the armpits and or, groin area. Not fun. Black spots would appear all over your body. It was uncomfortable, and it was noticeable, definitely to say the least, that you were plagued out. Almost all that were infected died within 3 days, more often than not without a fever. Just randomly, boom, done. The drop in the population resulted in a widespread of wealth. That's, I guess, a bright side? Not really. Workers were demanding higher wages, farmers were demanding lower rents, and the poor got expendable income. Sounds a little familiar, dare I say. Number 4, Greek fire. One's absolutely Crazy. Greek fire was a weapon used in medieval times. It was particularly used by the Byzantine Empire, and it was known for its ability to burn even when submerged in water. Yeah, almost like magic, some would say. Some scary, hot magic. The composition of Greek fire was a closely guarded secret, but it was known to be a highly flammable liquid that could be projected from tubes onto enemy ships or soldiers. So yeah, they would just blast liquid lava at you, and then they're like, yeah, war's done, just like that. Like in Game of Thrones, where it's just green fire. It was kind of like that. Greek fire was often used in naval battles and set enemy ships ablaze in 4 minutes or less, and its use was a significant factor in the success of the Byzantine navy. The exact ingredients and recipe for Greek fire, like I said, they have been lost to history, and its composition remains a subject of debate and speculation among historians. Let's hope we don't find this one. I don't know, let's find some pharaohs, mummies, tombs, treasures. That's great. Some guy's like, oh, the recipe for liquid lava that we can shoot at people. Awesome, let's do it. Number 3, the Vinland map. The Vinland map, this one's fun to all the toptographers, map people. This one's for all the map fans out there. The Vinland map is a medieval map that depicts parts of North America, including a region known as Vinland. Not to be confused with Vineland, that's pretty good, that's a fun one. Vinland is believed to have been visited by the Norse explorer Leif Erikson around the year 1000. Now the map was first discovered in the 1950s, and it's believed to date back to the 15th century. Buster Rhymes, I'm like, however, its authenticity has been the subject of ongoing debate among scholars and historians because, you know, it's like Atlantis. Some have argued that the map is a forgery, while others believe that it's a genuine medieval artifact, like the Shroud of Turin with, you know, Jesus' selfie. This is amazing. I have to say, I believe this was once a real place. Sure, why not? The amount of pharaohs and leaders, dictators, all these people throughout history lost in books that have been burnt. Of course, there are places and maps that have also been lost to history. Or maybe I've watched too many National Treasure movies. Could be the latter. It's probably that too. Number 2, the Dancing Plague. All right, this one's fun. Hit that like for Step Up 2 fans. This one's gonna be real sick. July 1518, one of the most bizarre dance circle / plague events, who knows really, in medieval history went down. It was the craziest dance circle all of history, I have to admit. The Dancing Plague. Yeah, why can't this be the plague that comes back now? Why it had to be the one that was gross, everyone's coughing on each other? Why could we all just be popping and locking in the streets in 2020? Would have been way better. The town of Strasbourg was calm, cool, and collect one summer, back in 1518, until out of nowhere, one woman began to dance, or convulse, uncontrollably in the streets. Others soon joined her, which is the weird part, and eventually over 400 people were all dancing the days away, or convulsing, one of the two. It's really tragic. See, this was not a good time. It's, you know, we call it the Dancing Plague, like, oh, they were all dancing in the street. No, it was a nightmare. People are like seizing on the ground. Seizing? People are seizing on the ground. It was tragic. A good amount lost their lives due to pure exhaustion alone. Authorities, they tried their best to help out the situation. They paid for musicians to perform for them while they convulsed, which is just the thing you need back then. They're like, oh my god, what's happening? Quick. They just played music. They're like, this makes it way better. This is so fun now. No, it was horrible. Everyone was sick. This was a disease. This happened a few times in Europe, believe it or not, between the 14th and 17th centuries, and we still don't know what exactly happened. All we know is that it was some sort of illness and that it was not like Step Up 2. Apparently it was not sick, nor 3D, nothing like that. And finally, number 1, no insults. This one here is great. This would change the game today. If we brought this one back, so good. I can't whistle, but it'd be like that. If you hurled insults at somebody back in medieval times, they were entitled to compensation, and they could summon everyone else who's around at the time to be a witness. Yeah, if you spoke bad of someone during the Viking Age, even if the person wasn't there, it could ruin their reputation. And because of that fact, you now need to pay them for the possible damages you caused with your words, with your sick, nasty words. It doesn't even matter if the insult was true either. Your reputation was how you gained employment back then. It's how you met friends, and it was really important. It was an important thing not to be messed with. Also, if you insulted one man, apparently you insulted his entire family as well. So it's like that Vin Diesel kind of Fast and Furious families everything vibe, where with one person, they're all coming at you. It was rough. There were some words, however, where a man would be allowed to kill you if you said it. I don't even want to know which words that was. Sometimes you went a little too far spreading lies, so they had to make it a capital punishment. Thou shalt not talk smack. Get out of here. Number 10, King Edward VIII. Directly after his father died in 1936, King Edward VIII took the throne, right? That's pretty normal. But the tides quickly turned when, less than a year later, he renounced his position. Now, this was of course a huge scandal right off the bat. This is not something that's taken lightly in the royal family. Turns out the woman responsible for stealing his heart was that of Wallis Simpson, American socialite who had already been divorced once before and was at this point working through her second divorce. So you can only imagine how Everybody reacted at that point, right? Oh, how dare she? His proposal to Simpson, of course, caused social and political backlash. The Church of England wasn't so chill with Edward marrying someone who had already been divorced. Yeah, they're not really okay with that. So Edward was forced to abdicate. Yeah, he had to, right, for love. Edward and Simpson then tied the knot in 1937, and they stayed together until Edward's death much later in 1972. Sliding into royal DMs right off the hop. Okay, we're in for a treat. Number 9, dark predictions. Of course, in recent years, the royal family has seen a change that many didn't really expect. When Harry and Meghan chose to renounce their royalty status, speculation began that this could be the beginning of the end for the monarchy. People only fueled their fire with questions, and also, somebody may have called it. Yeah, Nostradamus, he may have predicted this entire event. One of his predictions literally reads, "At the end of the war, the great powers change. Near the coast are born 3 beautiful children. They will ruin the town when they come of age, they will change the kingdom, and they will not see it grow anymore." Now, Harry is only one of 2 children, so I'm not sure if the, quote was talking about him and his siblings, or if it has more to do so with some other royal family members, but either way, there's some people who take Nostradamus' words very, very seriously out there, so I had to include it. Maybe there's something there, I don't know, maybe there's something we haven't quite broken down yet. That's why we need National Treasure 3, maybe this is the plot. Number 8, King Henry II. While we're on the topic of him, could Nostradamus have actually predicted the death of King Henry II? Because if he did, that's pretty curious, I'd say. Never used the word curious in my life, but I'm like, you know what, that's curious. King Henry II was actually a personal acquaintance of the prophet himself. That'd be kind of cool, being friends with Nostradamus. I'd be like, hey, how does Game of Thrones end? Please. While at one point in history, Nostradamus was seen addressing King Henry II as the most invincible King Henry of France, unfortunately, Henry proved to be quite vincible when he met his gruesome death, might I add, at age 40. Yeah, in the summer of 1559, not a great time. A terrible jousting accident went wrong and it left the king passing away shortly after from sepsis. This is a terrible story, but I have to explain because, it's history and, well, that's what we're here for. The jousting accident saw the king having splinters driven into his eye and then his skull as well by one of his young soldiers. And the Nostradamus quote reads, "The young lion will overcome the older one. It says he will pierce his eyes through a golden cage." Okay, already we're a little bit spooky. "And that 2 wounds will ensure a cruel death." So I'm not saying he predicted it, I'm just saying, kind of nailed it. Number 7, a fateful turn of events. Queen Victoria, her reign began back in 1837 and it lasted until the Queen's death in 1901. Now at just age 18, Alexandrina Victoria had to rise up to the throne. Had to, right? All these cases, it's like, yeah, they have to do this. She was born, of course, on May 24th, 1819, and Queen Victoria was actually 5th in line when she was born, nowhere near the throne. So right off the bat, it was actually highly unlikely that she would ever see the crown. But one by one, all of her family members began passing away fast. In 4 years, 3 of Victoria's cousins passed away, and then her father and her grandfather both died 1 week apart from one another. So on one hand, obviously it's sad, it's tragic, everyone's dealing with loss so fast. But on the other hand, by the time 1830 rolled around, Victoria was only 11 years old, and already she was next up to bat for the throne at 11. Imagine, that's like some ancient Egypt. Number 6, the Great Irish Famine. The Great Irish Famine took out many, many people. Back in 1845, potato crop that a lot of the Irish population relied on were suddenly no longer available. See, a group of microorganisms wiped them out, and in result, around 1 million folks died or had to leave. Now, it was draconian law and British ruling at this point that made the exported food hard to reach people. That's where things stopped. This famine led to Irish independence, of course, and anti-union movements. And the show Victoria pulled back 0 punches in 2017, where an episode showed the true happenings behind the Great Irish Famine and the role that Queen Victoria played in coming to the aid of her then subjects. It was the death of at least 1 million people. This was a very dark 7 years in Irish history. Historian Christine Keneally spoke out and says, quote, "There is no evidence that she had any real compassion for the Irish people in any way." Yikes. That's a historian saying that. That's how you know. Number 5, Meghan Markle, solo strut. Okay, back in May 2018, we all set our alarms, we woke up early, and we all watched the royal wedding, right? We sipped our tea in our pajamas and we pretended like we were there, right? Just watching, along with the other billions of people online. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, his new Duchess. At the historic wedding, Thomas Markle was just a no-show. Yeah, Meghan has walked down that aisle by herself in front of 1 billion people, watching at home or streaming it, and it was thought at the time that this was because of Thomas's health. See, right before the wedding, Thomas suffered a heart attack, right? Just days before, so of course nobody was upset. It was almost expected for him not to show up. But cut to a year later, we began talking again. Thomas and the Duchess are now not close, it seems. Thomas even spoke out against his own daughter at one point. There was a huge scandal where Meghan even spoke to Oprah, like Oprah and that big tell-all, and Meghan actually said to her father, if you tell me the truth about working with paparazzi, we can help. And he wasn't able to do that, and for me, has really resonated, especially now as a mother, end quote. So yeah, they're not talking, I guess, anymore, which more than fair. If my dad was working with the paparazzi, showing them private letters, I'd be a little pissed too. There's no way though, the guy can't even unlock his email, let alone sending one? No way. Number 4, Prince Charles and Princess Diana's divorce. Prince Charles, the oldest son of the Queen, straight up admitted to having an affair with Camilla Parker before his divorce from his first wife, of course, Princess Diana. Imagine having this is crazy. A princess? You cheated on a princess? That's insane. So in turn, Princess Diana addressed the relationship and what's happening during, that famous 1995 interview with BBC. She couldn't have said it better, if I'm being honest. Diana said herself, quote, well, there's 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded. Yeah, end quote. There's no better way of putting it, I think. It's a pretty baller way of saying it. I don't know. I haven't said baller in like 13 years, but I'm like, you know what? That's a baller move. It's pretty gangster. Diana also said she was in love with riding instructor Major James Hewitt during her marriage to Charles, so everybody was busy looking at their directions, it seems. Diana and Charles divorced in 1996, only 1 year before her tragic car accident. Now later in 2005, Charles ended up marrying Camilla. Has anyone seen Spencer? Kristen Stewart looked great in that movie, and now I want to watch it. Is it worth the watch? Let me know in the comments. I didn't see it go to theaters or anything. It kind of snuck by me while I was sleeping on all the good ones. Number 3, Prince Harry costume party. YouTube isn't a fan of some words, specifically one word that rhymes with Yahtzee, and it goes deep with history, as you could assume what I'm talking about. But with this being one of the biggest scandals, I have to bring it up, right? The Duke was always referred to as a bad boy, right? He was the bad royal, the bad boil royal. I don't know, I'm trying new shit here. But just how deep did these incidents cut? Well, before he settled down with Meghan in 2018, Harry had to issue a public apology back in 2005 because, whoops, somebody got photos from a costume party, and a few of them were in poor taste. Did the royal dress up as the Beast from Beauty and the Beast? No, he did not. Did he dress up like a witch? Like a little witch, maybe with a nice witch broom? No, none of that either. No, photos leaked of him wearing World War II German soldier gear. Yeah, I can't say too much, but it was even equipped with an armband, a very bad armband. Again, I can't say too much, nor will YouTube allow us to show too much, but you understand what I'm trying to say. You remember. It was poor taste. He could have dressed up in any way he wanted. He's a literal prince. And he does this? It's off-putting. Harry said afterwards, and I quote, I am very sorry if I caused any offense or embarrassment to anyone. It was a poor choice of costume and I apologize. End quote. Nice, right from the heart. That's good. Really goes deep with the royal history. We love it. Number 2, Vegas getaway. Nice, roll those dice. It's one thing to party like a rock star, but to party like a prince? What does that even mean? I gotta keep this Prince Harry train going because, well, now I'm mad at him, but there's even more photos from history that show what was really going down in the royal family, His priorities, dare I say. After that party incident, just 7 years later, scandalous photos emerged from Harry's Las Vegas trip. Yeah, I had a little boys' night, it seems. It turns out what happens in Vegas may just leak online for your entire family to see, and your grandmother. That's probably not a great time. These scandalous pics were taken during a strip pool game. Lovely, we like that. Make sure you call the right pocket while you're not wearing any. The scandal actually prompted St. James Palace to contact the Press Complaints Commission before the snaps even made their way to British tabloids. Yeah, they knew right off the bat they were fucked. They're like, can we call them? Can we send a pigeon? What's the fastest? And finally, number 1, Boy Jones and other attempts. Okay, being the queen and all in history, a security team is always needed, obviously. And during her reign, specifically Queen Victoria, there were multiple attempts to harm the young queen. First attack was in 1840. It was an 18-year-old man named Edward Oxford, and he fired towards the Queen's carriage. When Edward was accused of high treason, of course, afterwards, he was actually found not guilty due to, you guessed it, insanity. A couple years later, in 1842, it happened again. This time, 2 men fired at her, both also missed. In 1849, her carriage was attacked by William Hamilton. In 1850, as the carriage was passing the gates of Buckingham Palace, Robert Pate, a retired soldier, might I add, ran up and hit her with his cane. Victoria was okay, luckily, but of course she was shook. Then these incidents kept occurring again in 1842, 1849, and 1872. Attempt after attempt after attempt. But then things got a little worse and, dare I say, a little bit more weird. If you haven't heard of Boy Jones or anything that happened there, I saved it for last because it's so horribly creepy. A teenager stalked the Queen back in 1838 until 1841, and his name was Edward Jones. Edward Boy Jones. This guy somehow managed to break into Buckingham Palace more than once, right? Before Assassin's Creed came out, no idea how we thought of this. Guy just knows a route in, and he would break in and would hide under the Queen's sofa. That was his go-to spot. Or he would sometimes just sit on her throne. And one of the worst things ever, sometimes he would go through her drawers. He would go through the Queen's drawers. That's so gross. What? Like that's gross. He would steal her clothes until eventually and thankfully he got caught.
Starting off this list, in our number 10 spot, we have the Tichborne case. This was quite a bizarre legal case that captivated Victorian England in the 1860s and 1870s. It involved a claimant named Arthur Orton, who alleged that he was the long-lost heir to the Tichborne baronetcy. Despite numerous inconsistencies in his story, Arthur managed to convince some members of the Tichborne family and a significant portion of the public that he was who he claimed to be. The case went to trial in 1873 and it became a media sensation, with thousands of people lining up outside the courthouse to catch a glimpse of the proceedings. This was basically like the Victorian era's OJ trial, or the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard trial, you know? The people wanted to know. Despite Arthur's conviction for perjury, the case continued to fascinate the public for years to come, and it became a symbol of the era's fascination with sensationalism and fraud. The Tichborne case remains one of the most infamous legal cases in British history and is a cautionary tale about the dangers of believing in something without sufficient evidence. In our number 9 spot today, we have the London beer flood. This sounds like it would be quite a fun time, but it was anything but that, and instead was a tragic event that occurred on October 17th, 1814 in the St. Giles district of London. At the Mew and Company brewery, a massive vat containing over 135,000 gallons of beer suddenly ruptured, causing a wave of beer to flood the surrounding streets. The torrent of beer destroyed several nearby houses, killing 8 people and injuring many others. The flood was so powerful that it even knocked down the wall of a nearby pub, trapping and killing some of the patrons inside. The London beer flood was caused by a combination of factors, including poor construction of the vat and overfilling it with beer. The brewery had a history of safety concerns, and many of the workers were aware of the dangers associated with working there. Despite this, the brewery continued to operate, and tragedy struck. The incident became the subject of much media attention at the time, and it continues to be remembered today as a tragic and bizarre event in London's history. The victims of the flood were commemorated with a plaque on the site of the former brewery, and the incident has been the subject of numerous articles, books, and even a stage play. Not sure the logistics of that one though. In our number 8 spot today, we have the Victorian bicycle craze. This is a name to refer to a period of intense enthusiasm for bicycles that swept across Europe and North America in the late 19th century. The introduction of the safety bicycle with its chain-driven mechanism and rubber tires made cycling a much more accessible activity for the general public. It became a popular mode of transportation and leisure activity, particularly among the middle and upper classes. The craze also had a significant impact on fashion, with women's clothing becoming more practical and comfortable to allow for cycling. It's funny to think of now because it's just a bike, but at the time it was so much more than that. It's like how smartphones completely changed our lives in more ways than we probably even know. That's basically what the bike was like in the Victorian era. The bicycle craze had a profound impact on society and culture at the time. It led to the development of new industries such as cycling clubs, and it also paved the way for the modern transportation industry. The bicycle became a symbol of freedom and empowerment, particularly for women who were able to travel further and faster than ever before. The Victorian bicycle craze remains an important cultural and historical phenomenon that changed the way people lived, worked, and played. In our number 7 spot today, we have the Crimean War. The Crimean War was a conflict fought between 1853 and 1856, primarily involving Russia and an alliance of France, Britain, the Ottoman Empire, and Sardinia. The war was fought over various territorial and religious disputes, particularly regarding the rights of Christians in the Ottoman Empire. The war was marked by high casualties, particularly from disease and poor medical care, and it is often seen as a turning point in military medicine. The war also also featured some of the first extensive use of modern technologies such as telegraphs and railways, which greatly impacted warfare in the future. The war ended in a victory for the Allied forces, and it resulted in a significant shakeup of the balance of power in Europe. It also demonstrated the need for improved communication, organization, and medical care in military conflicts, and it had significant long-term impacts on military and political strategies in Europe and beyond. In our number 6 spot today, we have the East End Outbreak. The East End Outbreak was an outbreak of cholera in 1866 and was a major epidemic that struck the densely populated area of East London, causing widespread illness and death. Cholera is a highly contagious disease that spreads through contaminated water, and in the Victorian era, London's water supply was notoriously unsanitary. The outbreak was particularly devastating in the East End, where poverty and overcrowding made residents more vulnerable to disease. The outbreak led to significant changes in public health policy and infrastructure, as well as increased public awareness of the importance of sanitation and hygiene. The physician John Snow, which, feels like a weird name to say when I'm not talking about Game of Thrones, but the physician John Snow played a key role in identifying the source of the outbreak, tracing it to a contaminated water pump on Broad Street. His work really paved the way for the development of modern epidemiology and disease prevention. The East End cholera outbreak remains a significant event in the history of public health and the struggle for social justice. It brought attention to the urgent need for clean water and adequate sanitation, and it helped to spur reforms that improved the health and well-being of people in urban areas. In our number 5 spot today, we have the London Burglars. This is the name used to refer to a notorious of body snatchers who operated in London in the early 19th century. They were involved in the illegal trade of selling corpses to medical schools for dissection and study, and they would often resort to killings to obtain the bodies. The most infamous member of the gang was William Burke, who, along with his partner William Hare, committed a series of killings in Edinburgh, Scotland in 1828. They sold the corpses to the anatomist Robert Knox, who was unaware of their methods. Two of the group's members, John Bishop and Thomas Williams, were convicted of killings and sentenced to death. The London Burger scandal highlighted the demand for fresh corpses for medical research and contributed to the passage of the Anatomy Act of 1832, which allowed for the legal procurement of corpses for medical purposes. Emphasis on the legal part of that, though. It's important. In our number 4 spot today, we have the Great Stink of London. The Great Stink of London was an environmental disaster that occurred in the summer of 1858. It was caused by the city's inadequate sewage system, which allowed raw sewage and waste to be dumped directly into the River Thames. The hot weather only exacerbated the problem, which is disgusting, and it caused the sewage to ferment and emit a foul odor that permeated the city. The smell was so overwhelming that it caused widespread illness and forced many people to flee the city. Parliament was forced to act, and a major engineering project was launched to build a modern sewage system for London. This project was led by engineer Joseph Bazalgette, who designed a system of sewers and pumping stations that would carry sewage out of the city and into the Thames estuary. The construction of the new sewage system was a massive undertaking, involving the excavation of miles of tunnels and the construction of large pumping stations. It took several years to complete, but once it was finished, it greatly improved the health and hygiene of the city. The Great Stink was a turning point in the history of public health, and it helped to spur major improvements in sanitation and public health infrastructure across the developed world. Today, the legacy of the Great Stink lives on in the modern sewer systems and wastewater treatment facilities that are really essential for maintaining public health and environmental quality. In our number 3 spot today, we have Typhoid Mary. The Typhoid Mary case is a famous incident in the history of public health in the United States. Mary Mallon, also known as Typhoid Mary, was an asymptomatic carrier of the bacteria that causes typhoid fever, a potentially fatal disease. Despite being unaware of her condition, Mary inadvertently infected numerous people during her work as a cook in New York City in the early 1900s. After a number of typhoid outbreaks were traced back to Mary's cooking, she was tracked down and forcibly quarantined for several years. The case generated significant controversy at the time, with some arguing that Mary Mary's civil rights had been violated, and others maintaining that public safety justified her isolation. The Typhoid Mary case remains significant for its implications for public health policy and for the balance between individual rights and public safety. In our number 2 spot today, we have the Birmingham riots. These riots took place in 1839, and they were a series of violent clashes that occurred in the city of Birmingham, England. The riots were sparked by tensions between two groups: the Chartists, who were calling for political reform and greater democratic representation, and the authorities who opposed the movement. On July 4th, 1839, a group of Chartists held a rally in Birmingham's Bull Ring, where they were met with opposition from local government agencies. The situation quickly escalated into violence, with protesters and authorities engaging in brutal clashes that lasted for several days. The Birmingham riots of 1839 were significant for their role in the history of the Chartist movement, and it is said that the events of 1839 demonstrated the lengths to which authorities were willing to go to suppress the movement. And finally, in our number 1 spot today, we have the Brown Dog Affair. This was a controversy that arose in the early 20th century in London over the use of animals in medical research. In 1903, a statue of a brown dog was erected in Battersea, which had been used in vivisection experiments by a scientist named William Bayliss. If you're unfamiliar, vivisection is defined as, quote, the practice of performing operations on live animals for the purpose of experimentation or scientific research. While I am all for the advancement of science, I do believe in ethical studies, and this clearly was not that. The statue was intended as a memorial to the countless animals that had been used in medical research, but it was met with outrage from some people. Anti-vivisection groups saw it as a symbol of animal cruelty, while some medical researchers saw it as an attack on their work. In 1907, a group of medical students attacked the statue during a protest, sparking a violent confrontation with anti-vivisection activists. The statue was eventually removed by authorities, but the controversy continued to rage on for many years. The Brown Dog Affair highlighted the deep divisions in society over the use of animals in medical research and contributed to the development of new laws and regulations aimed at protecting animal welfare.
Kicking off the list at number 10, the first zoo. Long before the pyramids were even built, Egyptians were getting quite creative. They were the first to see a petting zoo. How brave is that, if anything? Yeah, let's just start touching animals and then see what happens. Let's do it. 6,000 years ago, Hierakonpolis was the capital of Upper Egypt during the pre-dynastic period. It was beautiful. It was sitting alongside the Nile River, which was even more beautiful back then, you can't even imagine. And in those days, perhaps the best way to flaunt your wealth was by getting an exotic pet. Yeah, the old Mike Tyson trick. There were excavations done back in the late 19th century by English archaeologists James Quibble and Frederick Green, and they discovered that this town was once thriving with over 10,000 residents. It's a lot of people. It's a lot more people than we ever thought. That alone is amazing. That's a historical feat. But when further studies were performed, they also found the remains of an elephant surrounded in cosmetics, surrounded in ivory bracelets and amethyst beads, the whole glorious, you name it. A worshipped elephant. That's odd. Then they found the remains of cats and dogs, also worshipped. The dogs slightly more worshipped. Common pets, some crocodiles, again, brave owners there. There's also hippos, leopards, wild ox. It was a wild time. They were carefully buried, but the broken bones suggested a cruel history sometimes. But most of the times, they were pets. Not as bad as we thought there. I'm like, oh, ancient pets? No, they're good. A lot of ivory. Number 9. King Tut's passing. Perhaps one of the greatest mysteries is of course the history of the young King Tut. Younger than we remember, honestly. The young boy became pharaoh at just age 9 in 1332 BC. Yeah, what were you doing at age 9? I was mini golfing. Maybe. I don't even know. During his time ruling, the young king had to face a country in conflict. Egypt and Nubia at this point were going head to head over land, and not even 10 years into ruling, the young pharaoh passed away at age 18. It wasn't until 1922 until he was ever seen again. That's when Howard Carter, of course, discovered the tomb of the lost king, appropriately in the Valley of the Kings. This is where we could have been more careful, historically, because when Tut was discovered, they tried to move his body out of the oil that coated the coffin, but in doing so, they got a little bit too excited. They didn't really know what they were doing back then, so they damaged him. Yeah, they damaged an ancient king. How brutal is that? So now it's next to impossible to tell what really took his life at such an early age, especially for a king. We have some ideas though, it's not entirely hopeless at this point. It was believed King Tut, after some 3D scans were done, had a broken leg, so he may have fallen off a chariot or something. So if King Tut passed at an early age, out of nowhere, hopefully this was the reason why, or else there's another mystery afoot. Number 8, the first peace treaty. The first peace treaty in history ever was back in 1259 BC. Now at this point, ancient Egyptians and the Hittite Empire were fighting over what's now modern-day Syria. This conflict had been lasting for centuries, and finally, come 1274 BC, the Battle of Kadesh was now underway. Of course, there was tons of bloodshed, no clear victor in sight, so what's left to do at this point? For the first time ever, a peace treaty was agreed upon. Ramses II and King Hattusili III both negotiated a peace treaty where both sides would aid each other if perhaps a third party decided to get involved. They saw their resources, they saw that they were lacking on both sides, so like, hey, we have no shot really, let's just team up. A copy of the treaty can now be found in New York above the entrance to the United Nations Security Council chamber. It's also in the Guinness Book of World Records as the oldest peace treaty ever. That's how you know it's official, if you don't believe me. Every 90s kid watching right now is like, oh, really? Amen. That's a fact. That's a true fact right there. Those holographic covers. What a trip. Number 7, board games. I love board games a lot, even Monopoly. I have the patience for it every now and then. But ancient Egyptians, talk about patience, my friends. They also loved board games. They created them. They got that board from time to time. Dogs and Jackals, Mehen and Senet, and 20 Squares, those are the classics. Mehen was played during the pre-dynastic period, around 2500 BC. Now the goal was to reach the center of the spiral, so we think we're trying to piece it together. The board was a coiled snake almost, pretty creative. Senet was the most popular game of all time. Queen and kings alike would play this one. Senet had a long board with 30 squares painted on it. Now of course the rules are still unknown, still heavily debated, just like Monopoly even today. But we have some ideas how Egyptians played it. 3 rows of 10 squares, the last 5 are decorated, so it's assumed, like everything else in ancient Egypt, that this was themed on the afterlife. Plus, King Tut was buried with one of these boards. I'm gonna be buried with a GameCube or something like that. There's also some paintings of Queen Nefertiti playing Senet, so that's how you know it's a good one. It looks a lot like chess. Imagine playing a pharaoh in chess. God, I'd be so anxious. I'd be so nerve-wracking. I wouldn't even play checkers with a pharaoh. That'd be too scary. I'm bad at checkers and chess. I don't know how to play chess. I'm lying to you guys. I've never played chess. I don't know how to. Number 6, Akhenaten. This queen was ruling during the 18th dynasty of Egypt. The pharaoh Akhenaten, well, this was his daughter. She followed in her father's footsteps and was a great ruler, but she was also the wife and half-brother of one King Tut. A pretty conflicted spot to be in historically. Her and King Tut had the same father, but their mothers were different. Now after Tut's death, however, it's believed this queen may have married the pharaoh Ai shortly after, and perhaps she's buried near him right now in the Valley of the Kings. Back in 2010, DNA testing was being done in tomb KB21, and there were 2 18th dynasty queens that were recovered from that tomb in the Valley of the Kings. Could it be? Perhaps? There wasn't enough data that was found from the mummy, but they do know that the DNA is somewhat of an 18th dynasty royal bloodline, so we're definitely close. In another tomb, tomb KB63, numerous coffins were found, and one had an imprint of a woman on it, along with jewelry, women's clothing at the time, but the biggest clue really at this point was pottery fragments. Of course, it's always in the pottery. We've all played Ocarina of Time, always check the pots. The name Patan was on one of these pottery fragments. That's another clue. The only person to ever use this name historically was the long-lost queen of Akhenaten. So now we're getting real close. Dangerously close. But it feels weird to watch so many tombs be opened up at this point. Like, yeah, we're getting close to finding out things historically, but can we just leave these leading ladies alone? I feel like they dealt with enough men in their lifetime. Now we're just like, we're like, hey, is that her? Nope, we're good. It's like, let them rest. They have fake doors. They don't want us coming in. Number 5, Queen Nefertiti's disappearance. Ruling alongside the pharaoh Akhenaten from 1353 to 1336 BC, Queen Nefertiti, aka Lady of Grace, aka Hereditary Princess, was born in 1370 BC. She was born in the Egyptian city of Thebes. She was only 15 years old when she married 16-year-old Akhenaten. Again, always so young and just forced. This family forced fun. She worshipped the sun god Aten at the time, and alongside her young husband, she built a new capital called Amarna. She even created a new religion. She was onto some good stuff. She ruled over what's now considered the wealthiest period in Egyptian history. Nefertiti had 6 children, which were all daughters. Many believe this has something to do with her disappearance. After reconstructing Egypt's religious and political structure, soaring to new heights as a woman in the Egyptian court, the queen just vanished. Yeah, historically, just like that, boom. During the 12th year of the 17 that her husband ruled for, historical records seem to have just wiped out the queen's side of the legacy. She was gone from everything, and many believe that she didn't actually die, but rather, she disguised herself and continued to rule. See, the next in line after Akhenaten's reign was Pharaoh Smenkhkare. Was that really Nefertiti in disguise? I hope so. That's like some she's the man stuff right there. The reason we believe she may have disguised herself as a man is because of the female pharaoh, Hatshepsut. She ruled with a fake beard in the 15th century, so it's possible, we've seen it. And lastly, there's a theory that the reason Nefertiti was banished was because she couldn't produce a male heir. Like I mentioned, she had 6 daughters and then she disappeared. This is ancient history we're talking about. Always brutal, no matter what. Beautiful, but brutal. Number 4, Cleopatra's. Sure, she may have been born in Egypt, but Cleopatra, despite what many believe, was not Egyptian. She was the last Greek ruler of Egypt, and after Alexander the Great's death in 323 BC, Ptolemy then took over Egypt, which in turn launched this wave, this dynasty of Greek rulers that lasted for centuries. DNA-wise, she was barely Egyptian, but as she grew up, she was determined to learn all about Egyptian culture. And due to political structure, she started to style herself after the goddess Isis. She was the first Cleopatra that claimed to be Isis after the third Cleopatra. Yeah, there's way more than we think. There's like 7. Number 3. King Ramses VIII. The last son of Ramses III. He's the 7th pharaoh of the 20th dynasty. King Ramses VIII. Yeah, history is confusing with these numbers sometimes. I gotta tell you, I had to type that one out a few times. I was like 8, 3rd, carry the 8, 9, Ramses what? The lost king had the throne for a very short amount of time, and historians are trying to understand why that is. What exactly happened? What in the King Joffrey went wrong with King Ramses VIII here? He was the only pharaoh of the 20th dynasty whose tomb is still lost in the Valley of the Kings, so maybe it's not even there. And the thing is, with his ruling being so short, the theory out there is that the tomb of KV-19 that belonged to the son of Ramses IX, many believe this tomb was originally built for Ramses VIII, but once he became king, everybody saw his true colors. They must have changed their mind at that point, or changed their lane or something. They were like, maybe not him, you know? There is a confirmed tomb that was never used for Ramses VIII, and that was tomb QB43. That was in the Valley of the Queens. It was made for him, but never used. Again, more mysteries. The poor souls who had to build all these tombs, and they're like, you don't need it? Okay. 57 years to make that tomb. You sure you don't need it? Okay. Number 2. Baboon police. Ancient Egyptians worshipped lots of animals. We mentioned that earlier. They had zoos and elephants surrounded in ivory, all that good stuff. At one point or another, you've heard about how cats were highly respected back then, worshipped. But they also worshipped other animals as well. Sorry, cat people. Other animals are fun, like baboons, believe it or not. They were pretty important pieces to this ancient Egyptian puzzle. Egyptians had tattoos of baboons all over them. This was before Harambe, you know, anyone monumental like that ever came around. The most famous piece of history that we have preserved is in the collections of the British Museum in London. There's a mummy on display, and it looks a little slightly different than the rest. EA6736, fun name, but he was recovered from the Temple of Cones in Luxor, Egypt. This little man dates back to the New Kingdom period, so anywhere around 1550 BC to 10 BC. Yeah, he's quite old. Baboons would appear in art and religion all over ancient Egypt, and one of my favorite facts ever has to be that in ancient Egyptian times, pharaohs would train baboons to make arrests. Yeah, imagine stealing food and trying to run away, and then you look back and there's 4 baboons doing parkour behind you, telling you to stop resisting, hucking bananas at you. That's crazy. And number 1, false doors. Imagine searching for a lost Egyptian tomb your entire life, alright? Imagine you spent years of your life dedicating everything to this research, and you finally find this door, this ancient door. You find an entrance carved into the wall. This is it. What lies beyond? You try and carefully open it with a team of archaeologists, but it won't budge because it is a fake door, my friends. It is a false door. Yeah, you just got juked out from a guy 4,500 years ago. He's like, gotcha. Took long, we did it. False doors in ancient Egyptian tombs are very common. Ancient Egyptians believed that these false doors were a connection to the dead. How beautiful is that? And that is how spirits were able to travel from here to there, and back and forth. See, most false doors can be found on the west wall because Egyptians believed the west to be the land of the dead. The west. That's the west. Which way? Which way is north? Your west, my east. How does that sound? There we go.
Number 10. Decemviri, the law of 12 tables. Well, actually the word means 10. 10 men, actually. Those special 10 would be the appointed men who would consider themselves the first ever lawmakers. The earliest attempts to create a code of law was the law of 12 tables. A commission of 10 men, are also known as the Decemviri, was appointed 455 BC to draw up a code of law-binding rules on both patrician and plebeian, which would be strictly enforced. Some of these laws included simple laws like, you don't break your word. If the army or king calls on you, you gotta go. And of course, if you hit or hurt someone, you get hit or hurt back. And you owe us some money. This system was the first in its place, holding people responsible for the things that they did and said in Rome. Strategic, fundamental, and important laws like, hey, no crying at funerals, alright? You burn my corn, I'm gonna burn your corn, and I get to burn you. And yeah, no meetings at night. It's dark. Okay, so they missed their mark on a couple of them, but a couple of those laws still stuck around.
Number 9, field surgery. The Romans were fierce on the battlefield, but they were also extremely handy. Who would have thought? This was the first time in history where quick surgeries were performed on the battlefield under the leadership of Augustus. Not Augustus Mayhew, it's a different Augustus, but he's also really helpful, like one time a year. Ancient Roman medics invented hemostatic tourniquets and surgical clamps. Yeah, guy invented clamps. Imagine that on a resume. Roman field doctors would also perform physicals on new warriors. Yeah, they would also combat the spread of disease. Although they were going to war and were constantly being patched up, the Roman military would often live longer than the average folk, because these military men were constantly being disinfected. They were checking their camps all day. Masks are hard in 2020, but the Romans were disinfecting the Colosseum. Nice, we'll get there one day. Maybe.
Number 8, the name Rome. We kinda got into this a little bit about those brothers Remus and Romulus. This barbaric history is loose and from many sources, so I'm gonna kinda sum it up into broad statements. 2 brothers, didn't like each other, kept fighting, raised by a wolf and a bird. That's pretty much it. We have seen what these two have looked like. Every statue and painting of these two is always like one of them stone cold Steve Austining the other one. One built a wall and the other mocked him and jumped over that wall, and then there is only one. I feel like I made a sandcastle once and Taylor stepped on it, and I can absolutely see how the city was formed. Flawless victory. Yeah, that sounds like brotherly love to me. Rome deriving from its name Romulus, the victor in this legendary sibling quarrel, giving the city its official name. Hey, you got the god of war as your dad, and the mother of all gods and goddesses as your mom, there's gonna be some feeling of purpose just lingering around. Guess I could just make a wall. And with a couple drywall holes later, with the death and defeat of his brother Remus, Romulus claimed his position as king and named the city after himself. Selfish much?
He ain't heavy, baby.
He's my brother.
Number 7, daily acts. In a time before Twitter or Facebook, how else do we get our fake news, right? How do we share our aunt's nonsense? How do we do it? 131 BC, this marked the first time a newspaper was ever used. Well, they're referred to as daily acts at this point, or acta diurna. The saying, written in stone, couldn't have been more historically accurate in this case. See, these texts containing information on military or civil issues, death notices, gladiatorial events, you name it, these were commonly written on metal or stone. Your morning news etched into a stone. Imagine the crossword section in 131 BC. Hey honey, who's the neighbor in Simpsons? Flanders, nice, that's it. Ping, ping, is that an F? Ping. It took time and effort, it was exhausting just to get one notice out to the public. So you best take these notes seriously, okay? Imagine YouTube comments written in stone. Took a guy 6 business days to write it, so he meant it.
Number 6, Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar was a Roman general and statesman, a member of the first triumvirate. Caesar led the Roman armies in the Gallic Wars, which, well, we've seen and heard about these battles that Julius Caesar led. It's the organized outfit of shiny metal and red, moving slowly and swiftly through the Gauls like a man-made tank before defeating his political rival Pompey the Great, another military leader, and also the husband of Caesar's daughter Julia. Okay, there it is, yeah. That's why he became his nemesis. Political differences. Yeah. Due to these ongoing internal civil wars between the two leaders, Julius Caesar eventually killed Pompey in battle and became dictator of Rome. This was until his assassination in 44 BC. Oh, mighty Caesar, dost thou lie so low? Are all thy conquests, glories, triumphs, spoils shrunk to this little measure? Fairly well. Antony, Act 3, Scene 1. Hey man, eye for an eye. You read the rules. He played a crucial role in the events that led to the Roman Empire and remains one of the brightest and bravest military leaders the world has ever seen. His story can be seen and heard top to tail in William Shakespeare's play simply titled Julius Caesar.
Number 5, basket of bees. Guess what this one is? It's pretty much, that's exactly what it is. It's horrible. We often look at ancient Rome as the birthplace for numerals, modern plumbing, social life, all that good stuff. Don't get it twisted, ancient Rome had a lot in common with the Dark Ages as well, okay? The punishments that they would inflict on others, horribly creative, I'll say that. Like for example, a basket of bees. A basket of bees, there we go. Maybe wasps, who knows, I don't know. History gets all crazy, you know? This punishment saw the victim placed in a large woven basket, naked, might I add. Then the basket was hoisted up near a beehive, of course, and then Romans would just anger the hive. They would just shake the basket. And then in turn, all these bees would sting said victim to death. This was meant to be a long and painful death, but eventually, this is how humans realized folks were allergic to bees. because they would meet their demise a little too fast, you know? Romans would be like, what happened? What's going on? Are we going home now? That's it?
Number 4, the Colosseum. They say Rome wasn't built in a day, right? Right? No, I'm asking you, I don't know, that's a saying, I think I've heard that somewhere. The word Colosseum is a Latin noun formed from the word colossus, meaning gigantic. And it's huge! It once held more than 50,000 people at one time or another. That's literally the Yankee Stadium. This oval stadium was built from cement, limestone, and volcanic rock. Yeah, that thing ain't going anywhere. Historians and archaeologists are still discovering and unearthing secrets of this site. In fact, most of Rome still hasn't even been dug up yet. What? That's right. In fact, only about a tenth lays discovered, with the other 90% still somewhere around 30 feet below street level. Who knows how many wonders of the world lay unearthed. The Colosseum, also known as the seventh wonder of the world, lays megalithic, 615 feet above the ground at the center or heart of the city. It is the largest ancient amphitheater ever built, and it is still the largest standing amphitheater in the world today despite its age. Its use for the last 1,000 years were rampant with events, festivals, and would even flood its center to reenact naval wars with real ships. How did they get those things in there? I bet that's how they made the bottle and the ship thing, just kinda. And all that water? Just a guy with a giant hose? Yeah, go ahead, turn it on. Yeah, we're gonna be here a while, guys. We gotta push the play.
Number 3, boot and rally. The Urban Dictionary added the old boot and rally back in 2002, but Romans, back in the ancient day, they were way ahead of us. Romans knew how to get down, and they also knew how to get it back up. Yeah, ancient Romans would boot and rally in order to continue eating and drinking. What would normally be a red flag at any house party or event was a sign of respect back then. These banquets, these were social events, okay? They were nothing like Tyler's toga party last Halloween. It's not the same at all. Same amount of puke, not the same theme. Attending these parties was a sign of social standing, so you wanted to be around the longest. You wanted to drink the most, dance the most, converse the most, and also, yeah, puke the most. No playing around in Rome, okay? I wouldn't last 2 hours at one of these. Kyle knows what's up, he's seen it. I bring Tums to the bar now, you know what I mean? I'm always prepared. The solution in ancient Rome was actually quite simple, long before Tums. See, what you would do is, you would excuse yourself from dinner, go across the hall to the vomitorium, then you would grab a feather, any feather you like, and then you would just go, and then put it back, and then go right back to dinner. And then enjoy more lobster, because, hey, now you made room.
Number 2, gladiators. If you've seen the blockbuster hit Gladiator with Russell Crowe, my name is Maximus Decimus Meridius, then you absolutely nailed it, because that's pretty well it. A stew of slaves, lawbreakers, and ex-soldiers, the Gladiator Games were one of Rome's most brutal and vibrant live events. Gladiators would be held underground under the Colosseum until they would be called upon to spill the blood of both man and animal in sport. Fighters would be matched based on their size, previous record, skill level, style of fighting, and years of experience, just like the professional contact sports today. Fighting out of the red corner at 195 pounds, the reigning victor, Spartacus! Oh, you're Spartacus? Oh, sorry. No, you're Spartacus. Okay. But it wasn't all thumbs down for these fighters. Gladiators were the celebrities of their time. Yeah, you can take that. There you go. Okay, one. We'll do one. Some gladiators even fought years after earning their freedom. Those years did not seem to be that long, with the average lifespan of the gladiator, though, living just to their mid-20s. I mean, it's pretty physical. The event was not just to kill your opponent. In fact, months of training and preparation was had. There was more of a spectacle of sportsmanship then, most of the time wounding their enemy, which would lead to the slow demise of a fighter, usually ranging between anywhere from 8 to 10 fights in their whole career. Come on, dude. 50,000 people cheering you on at the Yankee Stadium? Kyle! Oh, no!
And finally, number 1, fast food. Imagine getting a Happy Meal in 45 BC. You just get a toy of like Spartacus, just, oh, that's nice, I'll put it on the window. Romans were indulging in fast food before the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 BC. They were having a good time until they weren't. Archaeologists recently excavated a thermopolium in the ruins of what was once thriving city of Pompeii. We found the snack bar in 2019 and it's since been reopened. Yeah, you can now pick up shifts once again at this restaurant. that was open thousands of years ago. As of last August, the restaurant, located at the intersection of Silver Wedding Street and Alley of Balconies, they would serve pork, snails, beef, fish, you name it, and the corner also doubled down and crushed fava beans, more often than not mixing them with wine. So it was a good time, it was social. This was bumping on a Saturday night. The closest thing we have to ancient restaurants in Canada now is like coffee time. I don't know, every coffee time in Canada looks like it was damaged by Mount Vesuvius. Looks abandoned. The walls are broken in, nobody's working. I'm like, can I get a coffee? Hi, hello? Kicking off our list at number 10, the Field of the Cloth of Gold. Way too many words right off the hop. In 1520, King Henry VIII of England, he hosted a lavish birthday celebration for, well, himself, of course, he's a king, obviously, for himself, and a diplomatic summit with King Francis I of France. Two kings, one epic party. Here we go. The event took place in France and included elaborate feasts, jousting tournaments, okay, that's pretty distracting, and displays of wealth and power by both monarchs on both sides. Now the summit aimed to strengthen the alliance between both England and France, of course, with the fun jousting happening in the corner, again, so distracting at a banquet, but ultimately it did little to resolve their long-standing conflicts. The Field of the Cloth of Gold is remembered as one of the most extravagant events of the Renaissance period, with each monarch trying to one-up the other the entire time. It turned into an absolute joke. One king would serve dolphin and the other king would come and serve swan. It was a lavish cook-off for 18 days straight. Yeah, the party lasted 18 days, so no one's lasting the entire time. Today, this 18-day party would have cost around $19 million, give or take a couple of swans. And dolphins? Monsters, absolute monsters. Number 9, safety coffins. Not to be confused with the safety dance, also quite fun. During the 18th century, there was a brief trend of designing safety coffins. Everybody thought they were the next Tony Stark. They wanted to make the coolest coffin. Weird brag. To get a patent on one of these bad boys, this was next level. They were made to prevent people from, being buried alive, but again, in style. These coffins were equipped with air tubes, bells, and even escape hatches, which would allow someone who was mistakenly thought to be dead to signal for help or even escape their box of death. Now the thing is, many of these designs were very impractical or ineffective altogether. They were bull. These tubes were just a rat highway into your mouth while you were stuck in a coffin. It was horrible. God forbid you actually woke up in a coffin alive. Now you have to watch bugs and rats crawl out of this air tube until you actually did die. Some would say it's even worse than the original issue at hand. That's horrible. I'm itchy just thinking about that. Number 8, Andrew Jackson's pet parrot. I love animals. I had a bird for a hot minute there. Not the best animal in the house, but it's kind of fun. I don't know, he sucked at flying. Andrew Jackson, he was the 7th president of the United States, and he had a pet parrot named Paul. Pet parrot named Paul. There we go. It's a alliteration for my theater kids over at home there. The bird became famous for its foul language, which it had picked up from its owner, of course. Now, when Jackson died in 1845, his funeral was held in Tennessee. Now, Paul, the parrot, the loyal parrot, mind I remind you, he was present at the funeral and was reportedly making so much noise that it disrupted the proceedings. Now, according to the legend, Paul was eventually removed from the funeral after swearing loudly. They're like, yeah, get your little parrot feet, get out of here, fly, shoo. That's pretty amazing. A parrot getting kicked out for swearing, it sounds made up, but hopefully that one's true. That would break the tension for sure. I don't know. I can't help but get the giggles every time I'm at a funeral. I can't help it. Some historians believe this story was made up just to stain the president's history, but either way, I like it. I like to imagine a parrot being escorted out of a funeral, just like this, nice and calm, and then one brief let go at the end there. That's how you let go of a bird. You gotta go slow, and then there's that one moment of like you have to do it, no turning back. Here he goes, he's gone. Number 7, animal court. Speaking of birds and parrots, these little mouthy things. Animal trials were a real legal practice that emerged in medieval Europe and it lasted all the way until the 18th century, which is way too long for animals to be showing up in court. These trials involved pigs, cows, and even insects. Yeah, a ladybug took the stand and then just flew off at some point. These animals were charged and tried in court. The animals were often accused of crimes such as theft, taking one's life, and sometimes even witchcraft. Yeah, that's amazing. They were usually assigned a lawyer and a legal defense team, and the trials were conducted in the same way as human trials were, which is so funny. Real people had to wake up and go here. I wish I could have been a fly on the wall during one of these hearings. As long as I'm not the fly on the stand, we're all good. The verdicts of animal trials varied, but many animals were found guilty and then sentenced to death by hanging or burning. Again, imagine a praying mantis being hung in the middle of town square. Like what? Who's going to watch this? Who's representing this? More importantly, the trials were often seen as a way for human beings to assert their dominance over the natural world, I guess, sure, and they were widely criticized by religious leaders and philosophers. Number 6, Lake Peigneur. In 1980, Louisiana's Lake Peigneur was accidentally drained after a drilling rig penetrated a salt mine right beneath it, just directly beneath it. The odds here, this was crazy. What a horrible surprise down below, my God. The drilling rig was owned by the Texaco Oil Company, and the accident was caused by of course, a miscalculation in the well's trajectory. As the drilling rig penetrated the mine, it created a hole that quickly grew in size, causing the lake to drain into the mine below. The lake drained like a massive bathtub. This event created a massive whirlpool that lasted for several hours. It pulled in trees, boats, and even a nearby drilling platform all into this watery vortex. Like something out of Pirates of the Caribbean 3, or whatever one that was, where there's a massive whirlpool. It's haunting. It's the worst way to go. Remarkably, no human lives were lost in this disaster, which is so impressive. Today, Lake Peigneur has largely returned to its former state, although this time around it's now much smaller and shallower than it once was. Because, you know, it got drained. How terrifying is that? Number 5, the Great Stink. This one's fucking so funny. Where was this in Peaky Blinders? This would have been a great season. Everyone's just walking around plugging their nose. The Great Stink of London was a major environmental crisis that occurred in the summer, the real hot summer of 1858. Now at the time, the River Thames, which flowed through the heart of the city, it was heavily polluted with raw sewage, industrial waste, human shit, animal shit, so much shit. Pretty much everything and all horrible things you can imagine, all in this flowing hot soup of garbage. The hot summer weather made the problem 1,000 times worse, and it caused the river to emit a putrid odor that covered the entire city. It's just a blanket of stink and depression. The stench was so overwhelming that it disrupted business. It caused widespread illness and even forced Parliament to suspend its sessions. Yeah, it was so stinky, even Parliament's like, ew, no, we'll just talk later. Just go home. Everyone stop. The crisis prompted widespread public outcry, I would hope, and ultimately led to the construction of a new sewer system for the entire city. Thank God. I was really hoping for some sort of solution there. The new system was completed in the 1870s and dramatically improved public health in London by reducing the incidence of waterborne diseases such as cholera. Yeah, get rid of that, clean some things up. Yeah, maybe it'll help. It took 10 years to fix the sewage. How brutal is that? My God, 10 years. Number 4, closer to the heart. Oh, this is so fucked up. Back in 1822, the poet Mary Shelley, the author of Frankenstein, OG writer, here we go. Well, one of her deep dark secrets was accidentally discovered. I would be haunted by this one if I found this. After the death of her husband, very sad, of course, yes, Mary kept his heart in a silk shroud in her desk. Like his actual real life heart, just wrapped up, little piece of him just tucked in that third shelf down. Just slam it shut, and there we go. The exact reason for this unusual act is not clear, but it's believed that Mary was deeply devoted to her husband and wanted to keep a part of him with her at all times. Or again, 3 cupboards down, just slammed in the back next to the Crayolas. The heart was eventually discovered by Shelley's son, who removed it from the desk, thank God, and then buried it with his father's body, away from the desk, like outside in the ground, something kind of normal. Again, being a fly on that wall, what does that conversation sound like? The son's like, hey, found something, I don't know, let's talk about it. Number 3, the Battle of Los Angeles. Seeing as the Pentagon had another leak recently, it's always fun when they leak stuff, let's talk about the biggest false alarm ever. Or was it? The Battle of Los Angeles, otherwise known as the Great Los Angeles Air Raid, it happened during World War II, right at the end of February 1942. This event, first of all, it took place only a few months after the Pearl Harbor attacks, so everybody was obviously, you know, immensely stressed out, to say the least. Something like 25 enemy aircraft was spotted flying over Los Angeles in the late hours of February 24th. So at that point, appropriately, air raids blasted off. Blackouts were then put in effect. This was not a drill. Or was it? We don't really know yet. Artillery fire, machine guns, anti-aircraft shells, all blasted off, shot pointed somewhere in the sky, hopefully to hit something. In total, around 1,400 shells were shot off. 2 people had heart attacks because of the noise. 5 people died in total from this retaliation, and it was all apparently a false alarm. A press conference was held by the Secretary of the Navy, Frank Knox, and he called the incident war nerves, and that there was nothing actually flying above. Although now we think it was UFOs. So, I don't know, what do you guys think it was? Nothing? You think it was UFOs? Do you think it was just war nerves? I think it was probably nothing. It was just nothing. Number 2, the Battle of the Stray Dog. Oh, love animals. Love when they just cause battles. That's great. The Battle of the Stray Dog was a bizarre incident that occurred in 1925 between Greece and Bulgaria. Now, it began when a Greek soldier was chasing a stray dog and he accidentally crossed the border just a little too far to the left. He crossed the border into Bulgaria, leading to a heated confrontation with Bulgarian troops. Now, the incident quickly escalated into this full-blown battle, again, with this dog standing in the middle, not knowing what it's caused, with artillery fire and thousands of troops on both sides running at each other. Now, the conflict lasted for several days before a ceasefire was eventually declared. Now, although relatively minor in the grand scheme of things, the Battle of the Stray Dog highlights the complex and often volatile nature of geopolitical tensions and the unpredictable events that can lead to armed conflicts, like say, I don't know, a stray dog being anywhere at the wrong time. So by the time the International Committee negotiated a ceasefire to clear up this obvious misunderstanding, 50 people had already lost their lives. So keep those leashes on, folks. You know, dog parks only, I guess. And finally, number 1, the dancing plague. This is the funniest thing ever. I'll talk about this until I go out, honestly. July 1518, one of the most bizarre events in medieval history went down. And it's horrible, but humans did not help this cause. Humans were just the worst here. The town of Strasbourg was calm, cool, and collect one summer back in 1518 until out of nowhere one woman began to dance uncontrollably in the streets. Others soon joined her and eventually there were over 400 people dancing the days away. Now it's really tragic here because this was not a good time. A good amount of people here lost their lives due to exhaustion alone. Like, it sounds like a fun thing. We think back to it, it's like, oh, the dancing plague. People started playing music. The authorities tried their best to help the situation, so they paid for musicians to perform for them while they were convulsing in the street. Again, not helpful here, guys. We need some medicine, maybe something else is going on. We don't need a guy with a banjo to come up and liven up the streets while 40 people are having seizures. Not really gonna help. This happened a few times in Europe as well, a few dancing plagues between the 14th and the 17th centuries, and we still don't know exactly what happened here. All we do know is that it was some sort of illness and that it was not like Step Up. It wasn't a dance circle, it wasn't cool, it wasn't sick, all right? We don't need a guy playing guitar. This was bad. This was like a sickness.
Eating with the rich starts off the countdown at number 10. Medieval recipes depict a large variety of animals being served. Adding to the ones I listed previously are horses, lampreys, cranes, and crows. Hell, even beavers. And let's not forget the animals created by their chefs. One homemade animal was called a cockentrice, and it was actually multiple animals' bodies put together before being roasted. A helmeted cock was another chef creation. It was a roasted chicken wearing a tiny helmet that was sat on the back of a roasted pig, because why not? Dinner in a show is always fun, so in late medieval Europe, it became fashionable to have an entremetta, which was an entertainment dish. One such example is bakers cooked a pie shell in advance, and then after it cooled, they placed live birds inside the pie and resealed it. When cut at the table, the birds would then all fly out of the pie, much to the amazement of the many banquet guests, assuming that all went accordingly. FIFA fans may want to skip out on this next one because number 9 in our countdown is making football illegal. That's right, while I may be referring to it as primarily soccer in this video, what was still called football at the time was made illegal in the medieval ages. Now, there are quite a few reasons for this. Most popularly known is that the sport was extremely different then. It was violent and aggressive, resembling more of a mass brawl with minimal rules. However, it was also because only 2 years after soccer was banned in 1363, King Edward III would implement a mandatory archery education law. This would ensure his villagers could be used as soldiers should need be. King Edward believed that soccer, but also sports in general such as handball, football, hockey, and cockfighting were distractions, and at that time they could be doing better things. I'm sure there are many of you that would disagree. Next on the countdown is number 8, the future predicting friar. There's a lot to unpack here, so I'll just jump right in. English Franciscan monk Roger Bacon is known through history for his shockingly accurate predictions of the future transportation and life life that we have now. Bacon lived from 1214 until 1292 and was the successful creator of the magnifying glass. But he also famously predicted future machinery in his book Espetola de Secretis Operibus, if I got that right. Cars can be made so that without animals, people will move unbelievably rapid, and flying machines can be constructed so that a man sits in the midst of a machine, revolving some engines by which artificial wings are made to beat in the air like a flying bird. It's a little nonsensical, but you can see what he's implying. His other predictions included steamships, submarines, diving suits, and telescopes. That's pretty spot on for a guy who lived thousands of years ago. This is the same man who was also said to have sculpted a prophetic head of brass. Apparently, having been warned by a spirit that he must listen to whenever the head first spoke, Bacon set his assistant Miles to watch over the sculpture, which he did even past Bacon's demise. It's said that after the friar's death, however, that was the first time it spoke. First saying, "Time is," then time passed. Ignored both times by a confused Mile, the head spoke only once more to say time is past before it exploded into flames. And so the chance to consult the mysterious head was lost when it combust. What do you think of the legendary Bacon and his stories of mysticism? Time is past, as the sculpted head said, so let's be happy we left this weird tradition in the past. In at number 7 in the countdown, it's the medieval animal trials. Under the ruler's power, there was no exception to medieval law, and so it should come as no surprise that even animals could face the brunt of their alleged crimes. This was no casual affair. The rich and the poor gathered for these trials as spectators. Some of the accused animals were even dressed in wigs and gloves, fancy garments to be seen in front of the royal court as their fate was debated by the lawmakers. That should come as no surprise either, seeing as the medieval era wasn't exactly overflowing with entertainment outlets. There are records of at least 85 animal trials that had taken place during medieval/Middle Ages. And while the most serious offenders were pigs by a landslide, there are records of some roosters and even one donkey facing the judge. What were these animals being charged for, you may be asking? Many times it was the act of attacking or eating humans, as food and grain for animals was so sparse they'd often go hungry. There were also some accused of being heathens or thieves or behaving in lustuous ways. So make sure you have a walking buddy and always look over your shoulder, because I guess you never know when an ill-intentioned cow may be creeping up on you. Number 6 in the countdown is the St. Scholastica Day Riot. February 10th of 1355, a group of students who attended Oxford University decide to go into town for a pint at the Swindlestock Tavern. Little did they or anyone else know that this would be the start of a notoriously famous riot. It started with belligerent complaints to the tavern owner about the quality of their drinks and service. As the tavern owner was progressively more berated, he and other patrons lost their temper with these students. The escalation led to a verbal sparring between the students and bar patrons. Both sides ended up arming themselves, but luckily, things were quickly interrupted when the mayor stepped in and demanded the arrest of the students who had harassed and assaulted the tavern owner, thus sparking this whole disaster. What should have been a peaceful resolution caused a chain reaction, however. Oxford students rose up in protest of their peers' arrest and swarmed to attack the mayor. News of that quickly spread, and the townsfolk revolted immediately. Many of them were already very tired of these students and their entitled complex, and had been waiting for the opportunity to rage against them. The riot that occurred ended the lives of 63 students and 30 locals. While the case's investigation led to Oxford winning against the town in court, the Oxford Council was still made to parade shamefully through the village every year on February 10th, and they did have to pay a fine to the families of each student lost. For number 5, we're getting a little spicy with risqué's men's clothing. Now, you may have already heard stories or seen memes about ridiculously long pointed shoes and groin-flattering armor, but did you know that provocative men's clothing was all the rage for a period of time in the medieval era? It's recorded that in the late 14th century, men were quite keen to be seen in overtly short tunics and thin tights. By 1463, a modesty statute had to be passed, as men had upgraded to wearing cod pieces publicly, which did cover their mostly exposed genitals, but only by making them look cartoonishly large and bulbous in the process. A similar escapade happened with the Krakow shoe. These long, pointy-ended shoes were sometimes so long that they had to be tied back around the wearer's ankles or reinforced inside with a whalebone. The same statute in 1463 also addressed limiting these krakow shoes for those reasons. Seems like there may be a little bit of a compensation theme here. Both provocative dressing and shoe length were limited to those of extreme wealth after the statute passed, but that didn't stop the development of some more outlandish beauty standards. For example, number 4 in our countdown is plucked bear. Nowadays, whether you're scrolling through an app or walking down the road, you're likely to see advertisements for eyelashes and hair accentuation services. And while that may be pretty trendy and normal to us, now, in the medieval ages, having hair on your face would have actually made you stand out in a crowd. Women would remove their eyebrows, eyelashes, even significantly reduce their hairline so as to achieve a smooth egg-like effect. This was because the forehead was considered the center point of the face for many years, and so it would make sense to remove anything on or around it so as to accentuate it, right? Maybe. Moving on. If you're tired of her plucking herself bald, and she's tired of you wearing shoes that enter a room before you do, then maybe it's time for a good old-fashioned medieval divorce by combat. That's right, you heard me. Coming in at number 3 is divorce by combat. This finding was discovered in a historic German manuscript that laid out rules as to how divorce by combat was to proceed. Their decision to use combat as a means to solution was not unusual for medieval Germany, as trial by combat was part of their law system. Trial by combat was legally sanctioned duel that ensured whomever was to win the fight was deemed right. There are many ways that these duels could be fought and various weapons and locations in which to have them. The divorce by combat trial was placed when a man was put into a 3-foot deep hole with one hand tied behind his back. The woman, however, would have a normal ground and be able to move freely. This was believed to ensure a fair fight between the sexes. Now, there is some evidence that the outcome of these trials could still end in death, even if the death was not as a result of the combat. It's said that if the man lost to his wife, he would be taken from his hole and executed in the town square. If the woman lost, she would be then placed in the hole and then buried alive. So yeah, I'd say maybe try talking it out a little bit first before resorting to a public throwdown that can end in death. And while we're on the topic of trials, number 2 on the countdown is trials of the dead. Who would have such a vendetta with the dead that they would have them unburied to stand a trial? Well, new Pope Stephen, that's who. In 897, the months-old body of Pope Pomorfius, the first pope to ever be executed, was extracted from his grave to serve trial for his alleged usurping of papacy. The new pope donned the corpse in elaborate robes and even assigned a deacon for defense. You may be wondering why the new Pope Stephen had done this to his predecessor. Since a holy person's body was considered to become a holy relic in death, it became a holy rite to display their corpse in public tombs or churches so petitioners may still visit their former saint to leave tokens or deliver prayer. What better way to ensure that you have devoted attention of the community than a postpartum smear campaign where your opponent can't defend themselves because, well, they're dead. Stephen found the deceased Pope Pomorfius guilty so that he could toss his body into the Tiber River, as nobody can venerate his relic if his body is lost at sea. That's a pretty intense way to usurp the person who had the job before you. Joke's on Stephen, however, as shortly after this trial, he was executed just like his predecessor, making him once again come in second to Pomorfius. Call it karma. With that dose of crazy, we can move on to medieval madness, which ranks at number 1 in our countdown. What was the medieval madness? Well, if you're a fan of rye bread, you may not want to listen in on this. In an era without refrigeration systems as well as poor hygiene, produce was left to natural elements. As a result, mold and bacteria growth was common and would of course migrate into food. Ergot mold is the most well known for its effect on the brain. It caused wild hallucinations and extreme emotional changes as the chemicals in your brain became imbalanced. The consumption of this mold and bacteria has had a variety of exclusively unpleasant side effects, such as vomiting, diarrhea, convulsions, delayed visions, even mania and psychosis. These symptoms make it obvious as to why this could be labeled as a madness. The extreme cases of ergot consumption would of course lead to things such as loss of limb, gangrene, or death. And this connection between molding rye flour and ergot poisoning wouldn't be made until 1670. So for hundreds of years beforehand, commoners saw ergot poisoning to be things like demonic possession. Many theorize and connect the medieval madness to that of the time periods of the witch trials. The trials began in 1691 I, a year of intensive wet and cold which produces a higher level of ergot. They ended abruptly in 1693, a year said to be sparse on rye grain. If there's less to consume, there's less ability to be poisoned, making it arguable that there could be a connection between the two, especially as a side effect of ergot poisoning could be mistaken as demonic possession as previously mentioned, and that is also seen as a symptom of witchcraft. Still, this may not be the kind of bread you want to chase.
Number 10. Shin kicking. I mean, it's literally exactly what you think. You kick each other in the shins. A lot. Like over and over again. An early 17th century form of martial arts originating in England, obviously. This combat sport is a very simple one. Hold on to the opponent's collars to become close, and then kick the absolute out of each other's shins. Athletes would stuff their trousers with hay for extra cushioning and specifically design their boots to be stronger and more rigid. First one to fall or give up loses. Dude, I woke up this morning and cranked my pinky toe off the door. I literally almost blacked out. I don't know how these guys did it. Alcohol was forbidden before the game as well, which was loosely regarded. Yeah, obviously, I'm about to snap my tibia and fibula off someone's Doc Martens. I'm slamming a couple Guinnesses before.
Number 9. Chariot racing. Look, I'm still a new driver. Left-hand turns, they freak me out. I couldn't imagine chariot racing in any direction, even straight. No thank you. How do you even signal? Maybe? I don't know. Back in 700 BC, chariot races were like NASCAR. It was fast, it was loud, and it was dangerous. These events were held in arenas, like our modern forms of entertainment, and 10 chariots would race at the same time. It was chaos. It was a lot of dudes just flew out. It was nonsense. With tight turns and dust filling the air, it really was a spectacle. Horses were part of the Olympics come 684 BC. 4-horse chariot races were being held in Olympia. You could have seen this. And then you watch the guy jogging and you're like, oh, I like that a bit more. It's a bit more loud. I like that one. The riders, they were brave souls, man. The ropes were often attached to the riders' wrists so that if they went overboard, it was bad news for them. They were toast. Nobody's going out easy in the Colosseum, even when there's horses and nice things involved.
Number 8. Marathon running. We all know those runners who are up at 5 and get their mile. Who likes this stuff, man? Well, apparently the ancient Greek messenger Phidippides did. In fact, it was his job. Yeah, this guy would just like run place to place telling people stuff. The 42-kilometer foot race originating just shortly after the huge battle of Marathon. This is in fact where the sport gets its name from. Basically, a bunch of guys showed up early and Buddy was like, yeah, you gotta run as fast as you possibly can from Marathon to Sparta and warn them. But that's like 42.195 kilometers away. Exactly! Remember, and run as fast as you can. No water belt, no gel packs, just panic and blisters. This Olympic sport needs no introduction. Just put some shoes on and go for a run yourself. Next time you're halfway through your warm-up on the elliptical, just imagine the summer of 490 BC. Wouldn't it have just been easier to just text them that they're coming? They are coming. Scene. Oh, okay, that was real easy, thanks.
Number 7. Fisherman's Joust. Not to be confused with Fisherman's Friend, although that's also quite as intense. Fisherman's jousting, or water jousting, was a combat sport originated in ancient Egypt. Yeah, it goes way back. They invented beauty and also water jousting. That's pretty amazing. We love it. Keeping it balanced. Each vessel would have a few players, he says, and using one long pole per aquatic team, they have to poke and push the other players out of their vessel into the water. I'm pretty sure Kyle and I did this growing up with pool noodles. We'd ride inflatable alligators and just smack each other. We didn't even poke, it's just like the loose noodle, right in the neck too is the worst. You dip it, good night, that's it, you're off that alligator. Now, of course, it wasn't a spectacle like it was in ancient Egyptian days, but also may have not have been a game, turns out, yeah. Historians are still scratching their heads over this ancient hieroglyphic that appears to depict water jousting. Was this a fun pastime, or was this naval combat over fishing territory? For us, it was definitely the latter. It was for sure the latter. I was like, this is my pond, dude. Get out of here.
Number 6. Pancration. This vicious ancient Greek contest combines punching, kicking, and wrestling for an all-out physical combat. A mix of martial arts. Dude, this is literally UFC. And the tail of the tape. Are you ready? Are you ready? Let's fight! Big John McCarthy, of course, commentator on this fight tonight. Coming to you live from Las Vegas. This is literally UFC, people. You win by either knocking your opponent unconscious or by making them give up. Buddy, Patroclus has me in a flying armbar. I'm letting all of Greece down with that tap. Okay. Much like modern day combat rules, there was no biting allowed or eye gouging. I can't stop thinking about not only the brutality of the fighters themselves, but the fans. Thousands of years of crowds showing up to chant and cheer on their favorite warrior, just to spinning axe kick another right in the face. I love it.
Number 5, gymnastics. Imagine being the first guy to ever do a backflip. Imagine being the first guy to ever see a backflip. I think that's more of a spectacle, if anything. Gymnastics were developed around 500 BCE. Ancient Greeks loved parkour, apparently. Who would have thunk? Once the Romans invaded Greece, the Roman army made it a point to study gymnastics. They needed their soldiers to be quick, light, versatile, and flexible. Anything that makes them more terrifying, really, that's the better. Those moves were so dazzling that the Olympics had to include gymnastics as a sport. But once the games were outlawed in 939 AD, the gymnastics game almost came to an end. Once the 1800s rolled around, we saw the return of tuck jumps and straddle sits. Thank God, we almost lost it. We were so close. German doctors Johann Friedrich Gutsmuth and Friedrich Ludwig Jahn, they changed the athletic game forever when they created these new exercise routines for young men, including the pommel horse, balance beam, vaulting horse, horizontal bar, you name it, those things that we do when we work, when we work out every day. Chris is like, yep, I do all those every morning. These doctors wanted to see some flips. They got flips, my friend.
Number 4, boxing. Straightforward and simple. This ancient sport is depicted from hieroglyphics and tombs of Egypt all the way to the wall carvings of ancient Sumer. One of the oldest sports events known to man, boxing has made a place to stay in history for the last 5,000 years. The Greeks made this form of brutality into a spectacle by wrapping their hands with leather straps lined with metal to either knock their opponents unconscious or even death. Oh, okay, you wrap that under... Okay, how do you play, ref? Oh, you just punch each other right in the face until there's just one of us. Got it. Weighing in at 145 pounds with a reach across of 71 inches in the blue trunks, Patroclus Angelopoulos. No mouth guards, no rounds, just punchy and sleepy. I don't know why I'm still doing this voice. I don't know.
Number 3, Viking hockey. Being a Canadian and all, this one hit, this one hurt. Buckle up, lads. Turns out Canadians did not invent hockey. Yeah, we found out during Canada's 150th celebration of all times. We're like, what? Yeah, we found out hockey wasn't so Canadian after all. It was Vikings. Who knew? They actually brought it here in the first place. They also didn't call it hockey either. They called it a way better name. Slap fatten. Go slap some fat around with the boys. Oh yeah, me and the boys are gonna grab some Timmies and go play some road slap fatten. Yeah, instead of yelling car, they just yell "arr" and then they keep playing. They're like, no, turn around, go back, slap some fat to your car. Vikings would gather sticks and, of course, some fat, and then they would slap them in between 2 posts. They would just make 2 posts. Here or here, doesn't matter. They'd make the rules up. Imagine getting cross-checked by a Viking. See you later, chest plate. Non-existent anymore. Offside.
Number 2, long jump. The long jump, originating in 656 Greece, was an Olympic sport consisting of simply hurling your body over a vast distance of horizontal space. Usually these spaces would include streams, bogs, or ravines. This ancient sport differs from the modern long jump, of course, just a tad. And of course, long jump wouldn't be long jump without the flute music. That's right, this sport was always accompanied by a flutist since music was a very important part of the spectacle of the ancient Olympic Games. Hey man, can you play Jump by Van Halen? Just kind of gets... No? Okay, you don't know that one? No worries. Back then, the Olympians would hold weights in both of their hands, either 1, 2, or 5 kilogram carved stones, almost like kettlebells to help them swing momentum after their initial run-up. I love that the times are either something really safe and fun like swimming or jumping, and then you're like standing next to an athlete during the anthem whose job it is to literally break people. Yeah, I'm a jumper. Oh, you're a fighter. Yeah, I jump. So... Nice, man. Break a leg out there. No, it's not what I meant.
And finally, number 1, no rules football. Personal favorite, always gotta bring this one up. This is so scary. I've never played a game of rugby. I don't even know. I don't want any part of this. Sport fans are a bit much. I'll start by saying that. The whole yelling at the TV thing, unless I'm seeing the Green Goblin, I'm not yelling at any TV screen ever, period. But sportsmanship goes back, way back. Football was also a lot different in the late 12th century. See, instead of quarter kicks and throw-ins, you could do anything you wanted to retrieve said ball from the opposing team. Anything, like, what we were mentioning earlier, you can just do that and just knock someone out and take their stuff. Also, there's no limit to how many players you had on your side. You can grab thousands, hundreds, whatever, you name it. It would be town versus town. It was hilarious. They called this a sport. But finally, come 1314, King Edward II banned the game. Obviously, people were dying for no reason. The only time diving was allowed was back in this game. That's acceptable. When you would get kicked in the neck by a knight on a horse, more than fair. I'd say stay down if I were you, for sure. I would act. I'd be like, oh, my neck, what? See ya. 2 minutes in, I'm out of the game. I can't even play football today, let alone football in the dark ages. What a joke. My back already hurts from this.